Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never really told this story to many people. Most folks just think you're crazy or looking for attention when you talk about something like this. But I know what I saw that night in October 1979, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. I was just a kid then, 8 years old. My family, Mum, Dad, me, and my baby sister Emily, were driving back from visiting my grandparents in Toowoomba. We lived near Warwick at the time, so it wasn't a terribly long drive, maybe an hour and a half. But we'd stayed later than planned. My grandmother always insisted on feeding us until we practically burst, and Dad couldn't say no to her homemade pavlova. It must have been around 10 at night when we finally got on the road. I remember because Dad was annoyed about driving so late with Emily, who was only about 6 months old at the time. She was actually being good though, sleeping in her little carrier. The roads between Toowoomba and Warwick weren't great back then, especially once you got off the main highway. Lots of winding sections through bushland, barely lit except for our headlights. I always found it peaceful though, watching the trees flash by in the dark. I'd leaned my head against the window, feeling the vibration of the car against my temple, and had dozed off. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when it happened. Suddenly, the car jerked forward violently as Dad slammed on the brakes. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. This was 1979, remember, and I was launched forward, smashing right into the back of Dad's seat. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I remember feeling disoriented, not fully understanding what was happening. "Jesus Christ!" Dad shouted. My mum gasped. "What is that?" I rubbed my chest where it hurt from hitting the seat and scrambled up to look through the windshield. That's when I saw it. Standing directly in front of our car, caught in the full beam of our headlights, was something. Something that shouldn't exist. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A person. A bear. But we don't have bears in Australia. It was tall. Really tall. Maybe 6.5 or 7 feet. And it was covered in thick black hair. Not fur exactly, more like long hair hanging off its body. The headlights illuminated it perfectly, and I could see steam rising off its body in the cool night air. Its shoulders were massive, much broader than any person I'd ever seen, and its arms hung down past its knees. But it was the face that got me. It wasn't quite human, more like a cross between a human and an ape. It had a prominent brow that shadowed its eyes, but I could see them reflecting our headlights. 2 yellowish orbs staring right at us. Its nose was flat and wide, and its mouth seemed permanently fixed in a sort of grimace. For what felt like forever, we all just sat there staring at it and it staring back at us. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was Emily starting to fuss in her carrier, disturbed by the sudden stop. Then it moved. In one fluid motion, it dropped down to all fours. I'd never seen anything so big move so quickly. It galloped. That's the only word I can use. It galloped off to the side of the road, more like a gorilla than a bear, but not exactly like either. We watched it move about 20 meters away from the car. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. It rose back up on its hind legs and turned to face us again. Standing there at the edge of the darkness, half illuminated by our headlights, it just watched us. Its chest was heaving, either from exertion or emotion, I couldn't tell. But it seemed to be studying us, like it was trying to figure out what we were. "What the bloody hell is that thing?" Dad whispered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Mum was reaching back to comfort Emily, who had started crying properly now. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking. Is it a person?" "That's no person," Dad said. "Look at the size of it, and the way it moved." I couldn't speak. I was frozen, staring at this impossible creature just outside our car. I remember thinking that the stories about the yowie my grandfather told me couldn't actually be true. The Australian bushman's tales of hairy men in the wilderness were just that, tales. But here was something that matched those descriptions perfectly, standing less than 30 meters from us. We must have sat there for maybe 30 seconds, though it felt much longer. The creature didn't move, just kept watching us. Then Dad did something that shocked me. He put the car in gear. "I'm gonna hit it," he said. Mum grabbed his arm. "Robert, no, we've got the baby with us." "We need to know what it is," Dad insisted, but his foot hovered over the accelerator, uncertainty evident in his voice. "It's a yowie," I whispered, speaking for the first time since the encounter began. Both my parents turned to look at me briefly, then back at the creature. As if it heard me, the thing suddenly turned and in two massive strides disappeared into the darkness of the bush. One moment it was there, the next, gone. The only evidence it had ever existed was the sound of snapping branches fading into the distance and our family's ragged breathing inside the car. Dad sat there for a long moment, then slowly took his foot off the brake. "Did you both see that?" he asked, his voice unnaturally high. "Tell me you saw that." "I saw it," Mum said quietly, still comforting Emily. "What was it, Robert?" "I don't know," Dad said. He seemed shaken in a way I'd never seen before. My father was always the strong one, the one who fixed everything and protected us. Seeing him scared made the whole thing even more terrifying. "I told you," I said again. "It was a yowie, like in Grandpa's stories." Dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Those are just stories, Ollie." "Then what was that?" I demanded, finding my voice now that the immediate danger had passed. Dad had no answer. He put the car in drive and we continued on, much slower than before. For the rest of the trip, we were all silent, except for Emily's occasional fussing. Every pair of eyes was scanning the tree line along the road, looking for any movement. When we finally got home, it was past midnight. Dad carried Emily inside while Mum took me by the hand and led me in. I remember how tightly she held onto me, like she was afraid something might snatch me away if she let go. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that thing standing in our headlights, the steam rising off its body, those glowing eyes. Every sound outside my window made me jump. Was it following us? Did it know where we lived now? The next morning, over breakfast, Dad tried to rationalize what we'd seen. "It was probably just someone playing a prank," he said, not sounding convinced even to himself. "Some bloke in a costume trying to scare motorists." "In the middle of nowhere? At 10 at night?" Mum challenged. "And did you see how it moved, Robert? No person could move like that." "Maybe it was a really big kangaroo," Dad suggested weakly, "standing up, then dropping down." But we all knew it wasn't a kangaroo. It wasn't a person in a suit. It wasn't anything we could explain. Over the next few weeks, Dad made some inquiries. He even drove back to that stretch of road during daylight hours to look for tracks or any evidence of what we'd seen. He found nothing, no footprints, no hairs, nothing to suggest that something massive and bipedal had been standing in the middle of the road that night. My parents eventually stopped talking about it. It became one of those family stories that we never shared with outsiders. Who would believe us anyway? But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Dad staring out the window toward the bush, a troubled look on his face. I'm 49 years old now, and I've had a lot of time to think about what we saw that night. I've read accounts from other people who've had similar experiences in the Australian bush. Some call it yowie, others Bigfoot or Sasquatch, though those are more American terms. Whatever it was, I know it was real. The thing that still haunts me most was how intelligent it seemed. It wasn't just an animal reacting to our presence. It was studying us, thinking. There was a consciousness behind those eyes that was unsettlingly aware. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dad had decided to accelerate instead of listening to Mum. What would have happened if we'd hit it? Would it have attacked us? Would we have killed it and provided proof that these creatures exist? Or would something much worse have happened? I've been back to that stretch of road many times over the years. It's been developed now, with more houses and better lighting. Progress, they call it. But every time I drive through there at night, my eyes scan the tree line. My hands grip the steering wheel a little tighter. And I remember the night our family came face to face with something that shouldn't exist, but does. Sometimes I think about contacting one of those cryptozoology groups, the ones that investigate these sorts of sightings. But what's the point after all these years? I have no proof, just the memory of a massive hair-covered figure illuminated in our headlights, dropping to all fours, then standing again to watch us from the darkness. But I know what I saw. My family knows what we saw. And somewhere out there in the Australian bush, that creature is still roaming. Maybe it remembers us too, the strange beings in the metal box with the bright eyes. Maybe it tells its own kind about the night it encountered us. I still don't drive that road at night if I can help it, and I never ever stop if I see something standing by the roadside. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some creatures are better left unconfronted. But that doesn't stop me from looking out into the darkness sometimes and wondering if it's out there, watching and waiting. I've never felt comfortable in the bush since that night. The Australian wilderness feels different to me now, less empty, more occupied. And when people tell stories around campfires about the yowie or other bush creatures, I stay quiet. I don't share my experience. But inside, I'm thinking, I've seen it. It's real. And it's out there. Story 2. I still can't wrap my head around what happened that day at Sandy Creek. It's been over 40 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The smell, the fear, the way my body just froze up, it's all seared into my memory. It was December 1979, right before Christmas break. I was 16, and my mate Tony Solano and I had been planning this pig hunting trip for weeks. We were both students at Kedron State High, young blokes with more confidence than sense. The weather in Queensland that time of year was brutally hot and humid, but we didn't care. We just wanted to get out in the bush and test our hunting skills. My dad had finally let me use his .22 rifle after months of begging. I still remember how proud I felt carrying it, thinking I was some kind of expert marksman just because I'd hit a few tin cans during practice. Tony brought his dad's old shotgun, which honestly was probably overkill for the wild pigs we were after, but we weren't exactly experienced hunters. We'd chosen Sandy Creek because Tony's uncle had mentioned it was good pig hunting territory. It was about an hour's drive from Brisbane, fairly isolated but not completely remote. We'd packed our gear the night before: ammunition, hunting knives, some basic camping supplies, and enough sandwiches and soft drinks to fuel a couple of teenage boys for the day. We arrived early that morning, maybe around 6 or 7. The Australian bush was already alive with sound, kookaburras laughing in the distance, cicadas starting their daily chorus. The creek area was dense with eucalyptus trees, paperbarks, and thick undergrowth. It smelled like what you'd expect, that distinctive eucalyptus scent mixed with the earthy dampness of the creek bed. The morning passed uneventfully. We tramped through the bush for hours, sweating in the heat, seeing plenty of pig tracks but no actual pigs. By midday, we were tired, hungry, and a bit discouraged. The December sun was directly overhead, beating down mercilessly through the tree canopy. We found a small clearing near the creek to stop for lunch. We sat on some fallen logs, wolfing down our sandwiches and drinking lukewarm Coke that had been in our backpacks all morning. We were chatting about school, girls, and the usual teenage stuff. I remember feeling so grown up out there in the bush with a rifle across my knees, even though in reality we were just kids playing at being hunters. That's when everything changed. First came the silence. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The birds stopped calling, the insects went quiet. Even the breeze seemed to die down. Tony noticed it first. He stopped mid-sentence and looked around, sandwich halfway to his mouth. "Warren, you hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I understood. It wasn't what I could hear, it was what I couldn't. The bush is never silent, not in the middle of the day. Something was wrong, then we heard it. 3 distinct heavy footsteps. Thump, thump, thump. Not the quick patter of a kangaroo or the light trotting of a wild pig. These were heavy, deliberate steps that made the ground vibrate slightly beneath us. My first thought was that it might be another hunter, but deep down I knew better. No human made footsteps that heavy. We both slowly stood up, our lunch forgotten. My hand tightened around the rifle, and I noticed Tony doing the same with his shotgun. The footsteps stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, there was complete silence again. Then came a sound I still can't adequately describe, a sort of deep, rumbling breath, like something massive drawing air into enormous lungs. And then it appeared. About 20 meters away, at the edge of the clearing, standing partially obscured by a large eucalyptus, was something. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in terms I understood. A man. A really big kangaroo standing upright. But within seconds, I knew it wasn't either. It was tall, much taller than any man I'd ever seen. Maybe 7 feet, possibly more. Its body was covered in thick, matted hair, a dirty chocolate brown color. The hair wasn't uniform. In some places it hung in tangled clumps. In others it seemed thinner. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, its arms long and powerful looking, but it was the face that made my blood run cold. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't fully animal either. The eyes were set deep under a prominent brow, dark and intelligent looking. The nose was flat and wide, and below it was a mouth that seemed too wide for its face. For a few seconds, we all just froze. Me, Tony, and this creature. It was watching us, and I swear there was calculation in those eyes. Not the mindless stare of an animal, but something thinking, assessing. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was the creature. But suddenly I found myself raising the rifle to my shoulder, acting purely on instinct and fear. I fired twice in rapid succession, the crack of the .22 painfully loud in the silent clearing. I'm not sure if I hit it. The creature let out a sound, not quite a roar, more like a deep, guttural grunt of surprise or pain. And then it was moving, turning away with startling speed for something so large. As it moved, a smell hit us, faint but distinct, like rotten eggs or sulfur. It's hard to describe exactly, but it was definitely unnatural and made my stomach turn. "Holy shit!" Tony yelled, finally finding his voice. "What the fuck was that?" I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the rifle. We watched as the creature crashed through the undergrowth, moving away from us with those same heavy, ground-shaking footsteps. Common sense said we should get out of there immediately, but we were 16, and curiosity sometimes overpowers fear when you're that age. Plus, I think we both needed to confirm what we'd seen, to prove to ourselves we hadn't imagined it. "Should we follow it?" Tony asked, his voice higher than usual. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We gathered our stuff quickly, leaving half-eaten sandwiches behind, and began moving in the direction the creature had gone. We followed the sound of its retreat, not difficult, as it was making no attempt to move quietly. Every footfall was like a small earthquake, and branches snapped like gunshots as it pushed through the bush. We kept a good distance, moving as quietly as we could, pausing frequently to listen. The creature seemed to be following the creek line, moving upstream away from where we'd parked our bikes. We followed for maybe 15 minutes, never actually seeing it again, but always hearing it ahead of us. Then, suddenly, the sounds changed. Instead of moving away, they seemed to be coming from our right, then slightly behind us. The realization hit us both at the same time. It was circling back. "It's doubling back on us," I whispered, a cold fear gripping my chest, like it's hunting us. Tony's face went pale. "We need to get to open ground," he said. "If it jumps us in this thick scrub, we won't see it coming." He was right. We were in dense undergrowth that limited visibility to a few meters in any direction. Perfect terrain for an ambush. The creek was our best option. It was wider here, maybe 10 meters across, with a sandy bed and only ankle-deep water in most places. We splashed into the creek, wading to the middle, where we had clear sight lines in all directions. The water was warm from the summer sun, but I felt ice cold with fear. We stood back to back, weapons raised, rotating slowly to keep watch on all approaches. "If you see it, don't hesitate," Tony said, his voice steady despite everything. "Shoot to kill." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. My mouth was dry, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we stood there in the creek, waiting. The sounds had stopped. No footsteps, no breaking branches, just the gentle gurgle of the creek water around our ankles and the distant call of a crow that had decided it was safe to make noise again. After maybe 15 minutes of this standoff with nothing but the bush, Tony spoke again. "Maybe it's gone," he suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe," I replied, equally doubtful. Slowly, carefully, we waded to the bank of the creek and climbed out, still keeping our weapons ready. By unspoken agreement, we began making our way back to our original lunch spot, moving much more cautiously than we had earlier. When we reached the clearing, there was no sign of the creature. Our abandoned lunch was still there, undisturbed, but something caught my eye on the ground where the creature had stood. Curious despite my fear, I moved closer to investigate. There, in the soft earth at the edge of the clearing, was a footprint, not a human footprint, and definitely not a kangaroo or other wildlife. It was massive. I'd estimate about 50 centimeters long and 15 wide. But what was most disturbing was the shape. It had only 3 toes, each ending in what looked like a claw mark. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was incredibly heavy. "Tony," I called, my voice barely above a whisper, "look at this." He came over, and I saw his eyes widen as he took in the print. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. That's not possible." "There's more," I said, noticing a partial second print nearby. It was standing here watching us. We found several more prints leading away into the bush, in the direction the creature had fled, each one as distinct as the first, with that same 3-toed pattern. We didn't follow them far. The shadows were lengthening, and neither of us was keen to be in the bush after dark, not after what we'd seen. By unspoken agreement, we gathered our things and headed back to our bikes. The ride home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. What had we seen? What should we do about it? We decided to tell our biology teacher, Ms. Bowman. She was young, open-minded, and had always encouraged our interest in wildlife. The next day at school, we caught her after class and spilled the whole story. I expected disbelief or even mockery, but she listened intently, asking detailed questions about the creature's appearance, behavior, and especially the footprints. 3 toes, you say? She kept coming back to that detail. And a sulphurous smell? To our surprise, she offered to visit the site with her husband John the following weekend. We agreed to take them there, partly because we wanted validation from an adult, and partly because I don't think either of us wanted to go back alone. That Saturday, we returned to Sandy Creek with Ms. Bowman and John. The footprints were still there, though less distinct after several days. Ms. Bowman examined them carefully, taking photographs and measurements. John, who knew something about plaster casting, made casts of the best preserved prints. "I've never seen anything like this," Miss Bowman admitted as she examined the casts once they'd dried. "These aren't from any known Australian wildlife." Later, as we were packing up to leave, an older man approached our group. He was a local, he said, who'd been fishing further down the creek. He'd overheard us talking about what Tony and I had seen. "You boys encountered the Yahweh," he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing something as ordinary as a kangaroo or koala. "The what?" Tony asked. "Yahweh. That's what the old-timers around here call it. Been stories about it for generations. Big, hairy creature, walks on two legs. Known to double back on people who try to follow it. It's a hunting technique, turns from hunted to hunter." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "Have you ever seen it?" Miss Bowman asked, her scientific curiosity evident. The man shook his head. "Nah, but my grandfather did back in the 40s. Said it had a smell like the devil himself. Told me never to shoot at it if I saw it. Said it just makes him angry." He looked at me then, as if somehow knowing what I'd done. I felt my face flush with guilt or fear, I'm not sure which. We never went back to Sandy Creek after that day. Ms. Bowman kept the plaster casts and said she'd send them to a colleague at the university for analysis, but if anything came of it, she never told us. Maybe she was protecting us from unwanted attention, or maybe the results were inconclusive. I never asked. In the years since, I've researched similar encounters across Australia. Some call the creature Yahweh, others use Aboriginal names or local terms like hairy man or Australian Bigfoot. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. Tall, hair-covered bipeds with three-toed feet, often associated with a sulphurous smell. I don't know what Tony and I encountered that day in December 1979. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some unknown species of great ape, or a human with some terrible deformity living wild in the bush. But deep down, I know it was something else, something not accounted for in our understanding of the natural world. Sometimes I think about those moments when we stood in the creek, back to back, waiting for it to attack. I wonder what would have happened if it had. Would our small caliber weapons have even harmed it? Or would we have disappeared? 2 more missing persons in the vast Australian wilderness. I still get nightmares sometimes. In them, I'm alone in the bush, and I hear those heavy footsteps circling, getting closer. I wake up just as the creature lunges, the smell of sulfur filling my nostrils. On those nights, I lie awake until dawn, listening to the sounds outside my window, wondering if the Yahweh remembers me as clearly as I remember it. Story 3. Even writing this now, my hands are getting clammy. I know what I saw that day in '79, regardless of what people say. I was 22 then, young and full of energy, always up for exploration. My mate Darren and I had planned a proper bushwalk near the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. We were both from Sydney suburbs, but considered ourselves decent bushmen. Nothing special, mind you, just blokes who enjoyed getting away from the city noise. It was late April, still warm, but not scorching like summer. We'd packed our rucksacks the night before. Couple water bottles each, some sandwiches Darren's mum made. She always worried we'd starve to death out there. Basic first aid kit, and our cameras. I had this old Pentax my dad gave me when I finished school. Wish I'd had it ready that day. We drove out early morning in Darren's beat-up Holden, parked at the Golden Stairs Trail, head around 8 in the morning. Our plan was to hike to the ruined Castle Rock Formation, a decent trek, but nothing we hadn't done before. The weather was perfect. Bit of cloud cover keeping the sun from beating down too hard. The first couple hours were uneventful. Just typical bushwalking, watching for snakes, listening to kookaburras laugh in the distance. We talked about normal stuff, jobs, girls, complaining about how expensive petrol was getting. Darren had just started working at his uncle's mechanic shop and had all these stories about customers trying to get free repairs. The trail gets properly challenging as you approach the ruined castle. It's not just a casual stroll. You're scrambling over rocks, pushing through dense scrub, and the elevation changes can be brutal on your legs. We were making decent time though, and reached the base of the rock formation around noon. This is where the normal part of our day ended. We decided to climb up a bit before having lunch. Not all the way to the top of the formation, but maybe 60 or so meters up the slope, where there was this flat rock outcropping that gave a brilliant view of the valley below. Perfect spot to rest and eat. We sat there munching our sandwiches, pointing out landmarks. The valley stretched out before us, thick with eucalyptus trees and ferns. That dense Australian bushland that seems to swallow everything. From our vantage point, we could see maybe half a kilometer into the valley before the vegetation became too thick. I was just about finished with my sandwich when Darren nudged me with his elbow. Hard. "Mate, look down there. Something's moving." I followed where he was pointing, about 60 meters below us in the valley. At first I couldn't see anything unusual, just trees swaying slightly in the breeze. Then I spotted it, something large moving between the trees. "Probably just a roo," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew that wasn't right. The movement was all wrong for a kangaroo. We both went quiet, squinting down into the valley. Whatever it was moved again, and this time there was no mistaking it. This thing was walking upright on two legs. "Is that a person?" Darren whispered, though there was no way anyone down there could hear us. I shook my head slowly. No one else on the trail today. We hadn't seen another soul since starting out, and this spot was pretty remote. Plus, something about the way it moved just didn't seem human. The figure emerged partially from behind a large eucalyptus, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. It was massive, easily 2 meters tall, covered in what looked like long, shaggy brown hair or fur. Not clothes, actual hair covering its entire body. "Jesus Christ," Darren hissed. "What the fuck is that?" I couldn't answer. My throat had gone completely dry. We both instinctively ducked lower behind the rock we were sitting on, though we were still watching intently. The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, moved with purpose toward another tree. Its movements were fluid but powerful, not lumbering or awkward like you might expect from something that size. It reached the tree and stopped, then began doing something to the trunk. "It's stripping the bark," I whispered after a moment. And it was. The thing was methodically peeling long strips of bark from the eucalyptus tree, using what appeared to be hands with opposable thumbs, not paws. We watched, completely frozen, as it worked at the tree for several minutes. Then it began picking at the exposed wood underneath, occasionally bringing its hand to its mouth. "It's eating something," Darren said. "Grubs or ants, maybe?" That made sense. Lots of insects live under bark. But what kind of animal strips bark to get insects and stands on 2 legs like a human? The creature continued this activity for maybe 5 more minutes, completely unaware it was being observed. I had a sudden, desperate wish for my camera, which was stupidly still packed away in my rucksack. Neither of us dared move to get it. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the creature occasionally as it shifted position. Its fur was a rich chocolate brown color with some reddish tints in places. The face was mostly obscured as it looked down at its task, but what I could see wasn't a human face. The brow was heavy, protruding over deep-set eyes. The head seemed to sit directly on broad, powerful shoulders with barely any neck visible. "What the hell are we looking at?" I breathed, not really expecting an answer. Darren shook his head slowly. "No fucking idea, mate. But it's not supposed to be here. Nothing like that exists in Australia." He was right. Australia has plenty of dangerous and unusual wildlife, but nothing like this. Nothing that walks upright, stands 2 meters tall, and looks like some kind of primitive hominid. This wasn't in any wildlife book I'd ever read. The creature suddenly stopped its feeding activity and became still, completely still. Its head lifted slightly, and I had the horrifying impression it was sensing something, smelling the air maybe, or listening. "Do you think it knows we're here?" Darren whispered, his voice barely audible even to me right next to him. I shrugged, unable to take my eyes off the thing. "We're upwind, I think." After a few tense moments, the creature seemed satisfied. It turned away from the tree and began walking deeper into the valley, moving with that same purposeful, smooth gait. Not the awkward waddle of an ape at all. This thing was comfortable on two legs. We watched until it disappeared into the dense vegetation, maybe 100 meters from where we'd first spotted it. Neither of us spoke for what felt like ages after it was gone. Finally, Darren let out a long, shaky breath. "Tell me you saw what I just saw." "Yeah," I nodded. "I saw it." "What was it?" "I don't know. Some kind of ape? But there aren't any apes in Australia." "Exactly," Darren said, his voice rising slightly. "There's nothing like that here. Nothing." We sat there debating what to do. Part of me, the stupid, curious part, wanted to climb down into the valley and look for tracks or other evidence. But a much louder part was screaming to get the hell out of there. "Should we follow it?" I asked half-heartedly, already knowing the answer. "Are you mental?" Darren looked at me like I'd suggested jumping off the cliff. "That thing was twice our size, and we don't even know what it is." He was right. Whatever we'd seen was powerful. The casual way it stripped thick bark showed that. And there was something else bothering me, something primal, a deep-seated fear that told me this was a predator, not prey, something to be avoided, not pursued. "Let's head back," I said finally. "I've had enough exploring for one day." Darren nodded emphatically, already packing away his water bottle and the remains of his lunch. We were both suddenly eager to be on a marked trail again, surrounded by normal, explainable things. The hike back was tense. We moved faster than we should have, stumbling over roots and rocks in our haste. Every snapping twig made us jump. The usual sounds of the bush, birds calling, wind in the trees, now seemed ominous, like they might be hiding something else. "You reckon anyone would believe us?" Darren asked as we neared the trailhead. I considered this. Probably not. They'd say it was a bloke in a costume or something. In the middle of nowhere, stripping bark off trees to eat bugs. "I know," I sighed. "But what's the alternative? That Australia has some unknown species of giant ape man that no one's ever documented?" Darren was quiet for a bit. "My Uncle Terry, Mum's brother, he told me once about something he saw out near Katoomba. Said he was camping and woke up to something big walking around his tent. Thought it was a person at first, but when he peeked out, he said it was covered in hair, walking on two legs. You never mentioned that before," I said, feeling a chill despite the warm air. "Because it sounded mental," Darren replied. "Everyone laughed at him, said he was drunk or dreaming. After a while, he stopped talking about it. I'd forgotten about it until today." We reached the car and threw our packs in the back. The drive home was mostly silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. What do you do with an experience like that? Who do you tell that won't think you've gone completely mad? In the end, we only told a few close friends, all of whom reacted exactly as expected, with disbelief and jokes about what we must have been smoking that day. After a while, like Darren's uncle, we stopped talking about it. I went back to university the next week, got caught up in exams, then a summer job, then life in general. Darren and I still went bushwalking occasionally, but never back to that specific area. Neither of us suggested it, and neither of us needed to explain why. I've spent years trying to rationalize what we saw. Could it have been a person? Possibly, but that wouldn't explain the proportions, the fluid movement, the total comfort in that remote environment. A known animal? Nothing native to Australia matches the description. An escaped zoo animal? There were no reports of missing primates, and anyway, how would an escaped ape survive in the Australian bush? The years passed, and I mostly put it aside. Got married, had kids, built a career. But I never forgot. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet, my mind drifts back to that day in '79, to that creature methodically stripping bark in the valley below us, completely unaware it was being observed, or at least appearing to be. About 15 years after our sighting, I came across an article about yowies, Australia's version of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The descriptions matched what we saw. Tall, hair-covered, bipedal, ape-like features, but walking upright like humans. I was shocked to discover that Aboriginal stories going back thousands of years describe similar creatures. Settlers and bushmen have reported encounters since European arrival, all across Australia, not just in our area. I've never been fully convinced by paranormal explanations or cryptid theories. I'm still not. But I know what I saw that day. It was real. It was there. And to this day, I have no satisfactory explanation for it. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, stripping bark from trees in remote valleys, keeping to itself, avoiding humans as much as possible. And sometimes when I'm hiking in the bush, I catch myself scanning the trees, half expecting, half dreading to see that large hair-covered figure moving through the underbrush again. I don't tell this story often. Most people don't believe it, and honestly, I don't blame them. If someone told me this story, I'm not sure I'd believe it either. But Darren saw it too. And 30+ years later, our accounts haven't changed or diverged. Whatever we saw that day in the Blue Mountains wasn't supposed to be there, at least according to conventional science. But it was there. And sometimes I wonder how many other things exist in this world that we're not supposed to see. Creatures that have learned to stay hidden, watching us from the shadows as we blunder through their territory, unaware of their presence until, by chance or fate, our paths briefly cross. Story 4. I've never told many people about this. Most wouldn't believe me anyway. And the few who've heard bits and pieces think I was hallucinating or suffering from isolation. I know what I saw. It's been 43 years, and I still remember every detail of that face staring back at me. It was 1979, early in the dry season. My husband Michael had left for a 6-week business trip to Perth, leaving me alone at our property at the end of Fanny Bay. We'd only moved to the Northern Territory a few months earlier when Michael got transferred with his mining job. The property was nothing fancy, just an old wooden shack with a couple of caravans we were fixing up while saving for a proper house. The place backed right onto the mangroves, which I found beautiful in the daytime, but eerie at night. I'd grown up in Melbourne, so the tropical climate and isolation of Darwin was a complete shock to my system. During the day, the heat was oppressive, sapping my energy until all I could do was sit in front of our portable fan reading paperbacks. At night, the sounds from the mangroves would keep me awake. Strange splashes, rustling, and occasionally what sounded like something larger moving through the mud. Michael had been gone for about a week when it started. I was sitting on our small covered porch with a paperback mystery, trying to distract myself from the mosquitoes and the isolation. It was mid-afternoon, around 3 o'clock, that drowsy time of day when the heat makes everything hazy. I felt it before I saw anything. That unmistakable feeling of being watched. You know the sensation, like a physical weight on your skin. I looked up from my book and scanned the tree line about 30 yards from the house. Nothing seemed out of place, just the usual tangle of pandanus palms and mangroves. I told myself it was just nerves from being alone, but the feeling didn't go away. It intensified over the next few hours. I checked all the doors and windows that night, something I'd never felt compelled to do before. There was no phone in the shack. We were on the waiting list for a connection, which could take months back then. Our closest neighbor was over a mile away. The next day, I tried to shake off my unease. I busied myself with laundry and cleaning the kitchen, but by afternoon, I was drawn back to my spot on the porch with another book. The sensation returned almost immediately, that prickling awareness of eyes on me. This time, when I looked up, I saw something. Just for a second, a flash of movement between two trees at the edge of the clearing. Then I caught it, a pair of eyes, partially hidden behind a pandanus, watching me intently. They weren't animal eyes, at least not any animal I recognized. They were too intelligent, too focused. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to look back down at my book. I pretended to continue reading while keeping the spot in my peripheral vision. Whatever it was, it didn't move. It just watched. After what felt like an eternity, I casually closed my book and stood up, stretching as if I was simply heading inside for a drink. I walked to the door, my legs shaking with every step. Then, instead of going inside, I suddenly swung around and stepped forward to the edge of the porch. That's when I saw it clearly, and it saw me. We were maybe 15 feet apart, both frozen in mutual shock. It was shorter than me, probably around 5 feet tall, completely naked, but covered in hair. Not fur exactly, but hair that grew in patches across its body. The hair wasn't curly like human hair. It was straight and about 2 to 3 inches long. The hair was sparse enough that I could see grayish skin between the strands. The creature's legs had darker, denser hair, especially from the hips to mid-thighs, while the hair on its upper body stuck out in all directions. But it was the face that haunts me to this day. Its eyes were set farther apart than a human's, rounded and sunken into the face. The whites weren't really white, but more of a cream color, with brown irises that seemed to reflect intelligence and curiosity. The skin around its eyes was wrinkled, with creases that reminded me of an old person, though the overall impression was of something younger. Its neck was thick, stocky, not proportional to the body like a human's would be. The ribcage was broad and didn't taper down like ours do. It was almost barrel-shaped. Its arms hung at its sides, longer than they should have been. We stared at each other for what must have been only seconds, but felt like minutes. I was too stunned to be afraid at first. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Finally, I found my voice and shouted, "Hey, get out of here!" It was the kind of thing you'd yell at a stray dog, not whatever this was. It didn't jump or flinch like a startled animal would. It simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the bush with a strange, distinctive gait. It moved bent forward from the hip rather than stooped at the shoulders. Its legs never fully straightened, and I noticed its calves were disproportionately large. Its upper legs seemed unusually long compared to its lower legs, giving its walk an unsettling, fluid motion. After it disappeared, I ran inside and locked the door, my heart racing so hard I could hear it pounding in my ears. I was shaking uncontrollably, going back and forth between telling myself I'd imagined it and knowing with absolute certainty that what I'd seen was real. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing, jumping at every sound from outside. When evening came, I couldn't bear the thought of staying alone. I grabbed the keys to our beat-up Land Rover and drove the dirt track to the main road, then straight to the Darwin police station. The young constable at the desk clearly thought I was hysterical or drunk at first, but something in my description must have convinced him I was serious. Within an hour, 2 officers were following me back to the property. They searched the area with flashlights, but found nothing except some unusual depressions in the mud at the mangrove's edge. Not clear footprints, but disturbed areas that could have been made by something walking. One of the officers, an older guy named Constable Murray, asked me oddly specific questions about what I'd seen. He seemed particularly interested in the creature's proportions and gait. "We've had reports before," he finally admitted, looking uncomfortable. "Nothing concrete, mind you, just stories from the Aboriginal communities and a few white folks who've lived out here a long time. They talk about something in the mangroves. Most people dismiss it as superstition." "But you don't?" I asked. He shrugged. "I've been in the territory 30 years. There's plenty out there we don't understand." The police established regular patrols of the area after that. Constable Murray even arranged for a female officer to check on me every evening until Michael returned. They never found anything definitive, though one night Officer Collins, the female cop, and I both heard an unusual whistling sound from the mangroves that she couldn't identify. When Michael came home, I told him everything. He was skeptical at first, but supportive. We installed better locks and bought a dog, a German Shepherd mix named Rex, who would stand at the edge of the property barking at the mangroves for no apparent reason. We stayed another year before Michael got transferred again. During that time, I never saw the creature clearly again, though I caught glimpses of movement at the tree line occasionally. Sometimes at night, I'd wake to find Rex standing rigid by the window, growling low in his throat. The police eventually closed their investigation, labeling it as a possible sighting of an escaped primate, though they never determined where such an animal could have come from. Constable Murray told me privately that mine wasn't the first report they'd received, just the clearest and most detailed. I've spent decades wondering what I saw that day. Was it some unknown primate species, a human with a condition, something else entirely? The details have stayed razor sharp in my mind. The intelligent eyes, the unusual proportions, the deliberate way it moved. I've read about similar encounters in other remote parts of Australia over the years. Some Aboriginal stories describe beings that match aspects of what I saw. They have different names in different regions: Jugabina, Yowie, Yahoo. I know how it sounds. If someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were exaggerating or confused. But I know what I saw, standing there at the edge of my porch, staring at me with those two human eyes. It wasn't a kangaroo or a feral human or any known animal. It was something else, something that seemed to exist in the borderlands between human and not human. Michael passed away 5 years ago, and with him went the only person who ever fully believed my account. Now I just have the memory, still vivid after all these years. That face, those eyes, the way it simply turned and walked away when discovered unafraid. Sometimes I still dream about it. In the dreams, our encounter plays out differently. Sometimes it speaks to me in a language I almost understand. Sometimes it beckons me to follow it into the mangroves. Sometimes I do. I've never returned to Fanny Bay. I couldn't bear to see the place changed, developed, the mangroves possibly cleared. Whatever was there is there. It deserves its privacy. But sometimes, especially on hot afternoons when the air is still, I find myself looking toward the tree line, half expecting to see those eyes watching me again. I don't know what it was. I don't know if there were more of them, or if it was alone. I don't know what would have happened if I had followed it that day. All I know is that for a few moments in 1979, I stood face to face with something science can't explain, something that shouldn't exist but does. And nothing in my life since has ever felt quite as real as those brown eyes staring back at me, filled with the same wonder and fear that I felt myself. Story 5. I still can't shake what happened back in '79. I've tried to forget about it over the years, but some things just stick with you, you know? I'd never written this down before, but maybe putting it out there will help me make sense of it. Or maybe someone else has seen what I saw. It was mid-April in Queensland, nice autumn weather. I was 19, fresh out of school, and working at the local pharmacy in town. My boyfriend at the time, Dale, had this HQ Holden he was obsessed with, metallic blue, always polished to perfection. That car was practically his firstborn. We'd been dating for about 8 months, and most weekends we'd go for drives through the ranges just to get away from our parents and have some time to ourselves. That Saturday had been particularly hot for autumn. We'd spent the day at his mate's place having a few beers. Well, Dale had the beers. I just had one because the taste never really grew on me. Around 9 in the evening, Dale suggested we go for a drive up to Campbell's Lookout. It wasn't anything special, just a spot halfway up Mount Bartal where you could see the lights of town below. It wasn't a proper lookout with barriers or anything, just a wider shoulder on the road where people sometimes stopped. The moon was almost full that night, which I remember clearly because the whole drive up I was watching how it lit up the eucalyptus trees along the road. Dale had the radio on, playing some Skyhooks tape he'd recorded off the radio. We were just chatting about nothing important, his job at the mechanics, my annoying boss, normal stuff. We got to the spot around 10:30. Dale pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and we sat there for a bit with the engine idling. The view was pretty nice. You could see all the town lights spread out below, and the moonlight was reflecting off the dam in the distance. After a few minutes, Dale suddenly said he needed to take a leak. Seriously, now? I remember asking him. Can't help it, Em. All those beers earlier. I'll just be a minute, he replied, already opening his door. I rolled my eyes but didn't argue. That was Dale. Always terrible timing. The car light came on as he stepped out, and I watched him walk around to the front of the car. The headlights were still on, cutting through the darkness ahead of us, but they only reached about 15 meters before the light dissipated into the bush. Dale walked just beyond the headlight beam, into the scrub at the edge of the clearing. I could still make out his silhouette against the moonlight. I remember thinking how quiet it was up there. No traffic noise, just the soft rumble of the Holden's engine and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't all static, when something caught my eye on the hillside above us. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from a tree moving in the wind or something, but then I realized the shadow was moving independently, coming down the slope. It took my brain a second to process what I was seeing. The moon was bright enough that I could make out a massive silhouette moving down the hillside to our left, maybe 40 or 50 meters away. It wasn't heading exactly toward us, more like it was crossing diagonally down the slope, but that would still bring it pretty close to the car. At first, I thought maybe it was someone walking down from a hiking trail, but immediately I knew that couldn't be right. This thing was huge. Way too big to be a person, and the way it moved was different. It was taking these long, deliberate strides, powerful but somehow smooth at the same time. As it moved into a patch of moonlight between some trees, I got a better look, and my heart practically stopped. This thing was easily 8 or 9 feet tall, maybe even taller. It wasn't just tall, though. It was massive all over, built like nothing I'd ever seen before. Its legs were as thick as tree trunks. Seriously. I remember thinking they looked like the support pillars under the highway bridge, just these solid columns of muscle. And its arms. They hung lower than a person's would, swinging slightly with each step. They didn't look awkward or lanky, though. Everything about this thing gave the impression of incredible solidity and power. The thing that really struck me was that it didn't seem to have a neck at all. Its head just seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, giving it this hunched appearance. And it was covered completely in what looked like hair or fur, dark, maybe black or dark brown. It was hard to tell in the moonlight. I sat there frozen, my hand still on the radio dial, just watching this creature stride down the hill. It was moving with such purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. That's what scared me more than anything. It didn't seem wild or random. It seemed intelligent. Suddenly, I remembered Dale was out there, completely unaware. I started frantically looking for him in the darkness. I could still make out his shape about 20 meters from the car. The creature was maybe twice that distance away, but moving at an angle that would bring it closer. Dale! I tried to call out, but my voice came out as this pathetic squeak. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. Dale, get back in the car! I could see him turn toward me, probably annoyed that I was rushing him. Just a sec, he called back. Now, I screamed, my voice breaking. There's something out there, get in the car! I must have sounded properly terrified because he didn't argue. I saw him hurriedly zipping up and jogging back to the car. As he got closer, I kept my eyes fixed on the creature, which was still moving steadily down the slope. It didn't seem to have noticed us, or if it had, it wasn't showing any interest. Dale yanked open the driver's door and slid in. "What the hell, Emma? What's wrong?" I couldn't even speak properly. I just pointed toward the hillside. Look over there. Do you see it?" Dale leaned forward, peering through the windshield in the direction I was pointing. The creature had moved into another patch of shadow between trees, making it harder to spot. "See what? I don't—" he started, but then he went silent. The thing had moved back into a moonlit area. "What the fuck is that?" "I don't know," I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's huge. We need to go." Dale just sat there, staring. I could tell he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Is that a person?" "No," I hissed. "Look at the size of it and the way it's moving. That's not a person." The creature continued its steady progress down the hillside. It still hadn't turned directly toward us, but it was getting closer to the road now, maybe 30 meters away. I grabbed Dale's arm, digging my nails in. "Start the car, please, let's go." That seemed to snap him out of it. He put the Holden in gear, but instead of driving away, he flicked on the high beams. The extra light didn't reach all the way to the creature, but it must have noticed the change because it stopped moving. For a terrible moment, I thought it was going to turn and come toward us. My whole body went cold with fear. "Turn them off," I said through gritted teeth. "Just drive." The creature stood motionless for a few seconds, and then, I swear this is what happened, it seemed to deliberately step back into the shadows of the trees. One moment, it was this massive silhouette clearly visible in the moonlight, and the next, it had somehow melted into the darkness between the trees. Something that big shouldn't have been able to disappear so completely. Dale finally listened to me and put his foot down. The tires spun on the gravel before catching, and we shot forward onto the road. He took the downhill curves way too fast, and I was half expecting us to go flying off the mountain at any moment, but I didn't tell him to slow down. I just kept looking back, terrified I'd see that thing following us or somehow appearing on the road ahead. We didn't speak the whole way down the mountain. When we finally reached the main road, Dale pulled over at a service station that was still open. "What the bloody hell was that?" he asked, his hand still gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I don't know," I said. I was shaking all over by this point, the adrenaline crashing. It was like some kind of giant, I don't know. "Like a yowie or something?" Dale suggested, referring to the Australian version of Bigfoot that people occasionally claim to see in the bush. I'd always thought those stories were nonsense, just drunk people seeing things or making up tales. But what I'd just seen was very real. "Maybe," I said. "Whatever it wasn't normal." "It was probably just a bloke," Dale said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Some really tall bushwalker." "Did you see the width of it?" I argued. "And those arms? That wasn't human, Dale." We debated it for a while at the service station, trying to rationalize what we'd seen. Dale eventually settled on the explanation that it must have been a particularly large black bear that had escaped from a zoo or something, even though there aren't any native bears in Australia besides koalas, which are nothing like what we saw. I knew better. What I'd seen moved with intention. It had a presence that was unmistakably intelligent. The way it had deliberately stepped back into the shadows when our lights changed, that wasn't animal behavior, at least not any animal I'd ever heard of. Dale drove me home after that, and we didn't talk much more about it. I think he could tell how shaken I was. When he pulled up outside my house, he tried to make a joke about going back up there the next weekend to hunt for Bigfoot. I just stared at him until his smile faded and he apologized. I broke up with Dale about 3 weeks later. It wasn't directly because of what happened, but it didn't help. He kept trying to minimize it, telling me I'd just seen shadows and my imagination had filled in the rest. But I know what I saw. I've never gone back to that spot on the mountain. In fact, I've avoided the whole area altogether. A few years later, I read a newspaper article about hikers in the same range going missing. The authorities found them eventually. They'd just gotten lost and wandered off the trail. but for a moment, I wondered if they'd encountered what I had. People around here occasionally talk about strange sightings in the mountains, unusual noises at night, massive footprints found near creek beds, that sort of thing. Most people laugh it off. I don't. I listen carefully, trying to see if anyone else has seen what I saw. It's been over 40 years now, and I've never told many people about this. Those I have told either think I'm making it up or try to explain it away. The thing is, I don't need explanations or validation. I know what I saw that night in '79. I saw something that shouldn't exist walking down that hillside, something powerful and ancient that made me feel like humans aren't quite at the top of the food chain after all. I still live in Queensland, though I moved to a different town years ago. Sometimes when I drive past mountains or heavily wooded areas, I can't help but scan the tree line, half expecting to see that massive silhouette again. And every time I go bushwalking with friends, I'm always the first one to suggest heading back when the sun starts to get low. Whatever that thing was, it's out there, and I suspect it's not alone. Sagidis, Story 6, say Tain. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Part of me feels ridiculous even typing it out, but I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. My family tries to be supportive, but I can see it in their eyes. They think I'm just a scared old man who saw a bear or something. This wasn't a bear. I know what bears look like. I've lived in these mountains most of my life. This happened back in January, about 7 months ago. I'm 61 years old and have spent almost my entire life in North Carolina. I've hunted these woods, hiked these trails, and never once felt afraid until that evening. I was staying at my sister Lisa's place outside Asheville. She's got this beautiful property that backs right up to National Forest, the kind of place most people would consider paradise. 3 acres of cleared land, surrounded by dense forest as far as the eye can see. That evening, I was out chopping firewood near the edge of her property. Lisa's husband passed a few years back, and I try to help out when I can. Splitting logs, stacking wood, that kind of thing. It was getting dark earlier than I expected. January days are short, and the sun sets fast behind these mountains. I remember checking my watch around 5:30, thinking I should wrap up soon. The temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath in the air, and my fingers were getting stiff despite my gloves. I figured I'd finish the pile I was working on before heading inside. Lisa was making her famous venison stew, and my niece Emily had driven up from Charlotte to visit for the weekend. I was about 40 feet from the house, right where the yard meets the forest. The light was fading, but I could still see well enough to work. I had just set up another log when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. Nothing dramatic, just a slight shift in the shadows at the edge of the trees. At first I thought nothing of it. Could be a deer, maybe a coyote. We get all kinds of wildlife out here, but something made me look up. I don't know if it was instinct or if I subconsciously heard something, but I turned my head toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it. About 18 feet away, partially hidden in the underbrush, was something massive. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. The lower body was hidden behind thick brush and fallen logs, but the upper torso was clearly visible. Dark, shaggy hair covered its entire frame. It had a slight hunch to its posture, but even so, I could tell this thing was huge, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. I've been a hunter all my life. I know every animal in these mountains. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. This thing had shoulders, a neck, a head shaped like a human's, but wrong, larger, more primitive, and it was looking directly at me. People ask me what I felt in that moment. Honestly, nothing at first. Pure shock wiped my mind completely blank. It was like my brain short-circuited. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. Time seemed to stop as we stared at each other across that short distance. Its eyes. I still see those eyes when I try to sleep. Dark, intelligent, and utterly inhuman. What broke the spell was when it shifted its weight. Just a slight movement. adjusting its stance, but that tiny motion sent absolute terror flooding through my body. I dropped the wood I was holding, didn't even hear it hit the ground. My body acted on pure instinct. I turned and ran faster than I thought possible at my age, straight for the house. I don't remember the run, not consciously. My next clear memory is slamming the door behind me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. Lisa came running from the kitchen with Emily right behind her. They told me later I was white as a sheet, gasping for breath like I was drowning on dry land. Lisa thought I was having a heart attack. I couldn't speak, couldn't form words. My throat felt closed up tight. Mike, what happened?" Lisa kept asking, leading me to a chair at the kitchen table. My legs gave out as soon as I reached it. Emily brought me water, but I couldn't even hold the glass steady enough to drink. It took several minutes before I could force any words out. When I finally did, they just erupted from me. "Bigfoot! I just saw Bigfoot!" I saw the look they exchanged, the same look people always give when someone claims to have seen something impossible. Part concern, part pity, part, "Oh no, he's lost it." But I knew what I saw. "There's something out there," I managed to say, my voice steadier now but still thin with fear. "In the trees. It's huge. It was watching me." Lisa, bless her heart, went to look out the windows while Emily stayed with me. Through the kitchen window, there was nothing to see but darkness. The motion sensor lights by the woodpile had come on, casting harsh shadows across the yard, but there was no sign of anything unusual. "Could it have been a bear?" Emily asked gently. "They're coming out of hibernation around now." I shook my head vigorously. I know what a bear looks like. This wasn't a bear. It was standing upright, had shoulders, a neck. It was looking right at me. Lisa returned from checking the front windows. "There's nothing out there now, Mike, but I'll call Tom next door, have him come over with his rifle just to check things out." Tom arrived 20 minutes later with his son Josh. They both brought rifles and powerful flashlights. I watched from the window as they swept the yard, then cautiously approached the woodpile and the tree line beyond. They searched for almost half an hour, venturing a little way into the forest before returning to the house. "Didn't see anything unusual," Tom reported. "Some disturbed ground near where you were chopping wood, but nothing that couldn't be explained by deer or normal forest activity. No large tracks, nothing broken or damaged." I could tell they thought I'd overreacted to something ordinary. Maybe a shadow, or my eyes playing tricks in the fading light. But I know what I saw. That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the trees outside had me sitting bolt upright, eyes wide, heart pounding. I kept getting up to check the windows, peering out into the darkness, convinced I would see that shape again, standing in the yard, watching the house. Around 3 in the morning, I was sitting in the living room with all the lights on when I heard it, a deep rumbling growl from somewhere in the forest. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a cougar. It was deeper, more guttural, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. I woke Lisa, but by the time she came downstairs, the sound had stopped. The next morning, against my better judgment, I went back out to the woodpile with Tom and Josh. In the daylight, with other people around, I felt a little braver. We looked for tracks or signs, but the ground was too hard, too covered with fallen leaves and pine needles to show much of anything. We did find one area where the underbrush was crushed down, as if something heavy had been standing there. Tom said it was probably deer bedding down. I didn't argue, but I knew better. It wasn't until later that day that Lisa reminded me about the history of these mountains. The Cherokee have stories about the wild men of the forest going back centuries, and this particular area outside Asheville has had strange reports since at least 1982. A family about 5 miles down the road claimed something had been stealing fruit from their orchard for years. Another neighbor found footprints nearly 16 inches long in mud near his pond. There have been reports of rock throwing, strange howls in the night, and that unmistakable stench people always mention, like wet dog mixed with rotting garbage. I'd always written those stories off as mountain folklore, the kind of tales people tell around campfires. I'm not writing them off anymore. Those 7 months since January haven't been easy. I went back to my own place after that weekend, but I haven't been the same. I don't go outside after dark anymore, not even to get the mail if I've forgotten it. I've installed motion sensor lights all around my property and bought a shotgun, even though I've never been much of a gun enthusiast. My neighbors probably think I'm paranoid, and maybe I am. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel those eyes watching them. The worst part isn't the fear, though. The worst part is the doubt. Not my own. I know what I saw. But the doubt I see in everyone else's face when I tell my story. The careful way they choose their words. That must have been terrifying, Mike, they'll say. Not, that's terrifying that there's a Bigfoot in our woods. It's subtle, but I can tell the difference. Last month, I finally worked up the courage to contact a local research group that investigates Bigfoot sightings. They came out to Lisa's property and to mine, set up some trail cameras, did some interviews. They seemed to take me seriously, which was a relief. They showed me plaster casts they'd made of footprints found just over the ridge from Lisa's property back in 2019. Massive humanoid prints with 5 toes clearly visible. Seeing those casts sent shivers down my spine. Someone else had seen this thing, or one like it. The researchers found some interesting things on Lisa's property. Broken branches too high up to be caused by deer or humans. Strange hair samples caught on bark that they sent off for testing. They haven't gotten results back yet. They also recorded some sounds in the forest behind her house. Wood knocks and strange vocalizations that they say are consistent with other reported Bigfoot activity. Lisa calls me every few days now, keeping me updated. Last week, she said the motion lights on her back porch came on in the middle of the night. When she looked out, she couldn't see anything, but her dog refused to go outside the next morning, whining and pulling back on the leash. Emily doesn't come visit as often anymore. I don't blame her. Sometimes I wonder if I should have kept quiet about what I saw. Maybe it would have been better to convince myself it was a bear, or a man in a costume, or a trick of the light. But I know what I saw standing there at the edge of the forest, watching me with those intelligent eyes. I know what I heard growling in the darkness that night, and I know that whatever it was, it's still out there. So I don't go outside after dark anymore. I keep my doors locked, my curtains drawn. I jump at shadows and strange noises. My doctor says it's anxiety and wants to put me on medication, but pills won't fix what's wrong with me. What's wrong isn't in my head. It's out there in the forest, watching, waiting. I'm sharing this not because I expect everyone to believe me, but because people need to know what's out there. If you live near heavily forested areas, especially around Asheville, be careful. Be aware of your surroundings. And if you ever get that feeling of being watched while you're alone in the woods, trust your instincts. Don't do what I did and freeze in place. Don't stick around to get a better look. And whatever you do, don't go out there alone after dark, because sometimes the old stories are true. Sometimes there really are monsters in the woods. Just last night, I heard 3 heavy knocks on the side of my house, evenly spaced, like something using a branch as a club. When I finally worked up the courage to peek through the blinds this morning, there was a row of my tomatoes from the garden, carefully lined up along my porch railing. I didn't put them there, and no human would have any reason to. I still don't know what it wants. I just know it hasn't forgotten me, and it knows exactly where I live. Story 7. I've been holding this story inside for years now, but I need to put it somewhere. I don't care if people believe me or not anymore. I just need to get this off my chest because it's eating away at me. This happened in November of 2019, and I haven't been able to look at the woods the same way since. My cousin Dave and I had been planning a hunting trip near Helena, Montana for months. We're both experienced hunters and have been going out together since we were teenagers. That night we were spotlighting for coyotes, something we'd done dozens of times before. The weather was brutally cold, typical Montana in late fall, and I remember my breath fogging up the window as we drove slowly along this old dirt road that borders a thick patch of forest about 20 miles outside the city. We had our usual setup, my Ford F-150 creeping along at maybe 5 miles per hour, Dave riding shotgun with his Remington ready, and me with the spotlight sweeping the tree line. We'd been out for maybe 3 hours with no luck, just empty fields and the occasional deer, nothing worth stopping for. It was around 11:30 at night when everything changed. The moon was nearly full and the sky was clear, so visibility was decent even without the spotlight. We just turned down this narrow access road that cuts between a large meadow and a really dense section of pine forest. Dave was complaining about the cold and talking about heading back soon when I swept the spotlight across the tree line and caught a pair of eyes reflecting back. "Got something," I said, steadying the beam. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe an elk standing at the edge of the trees. The eyes were too high off the ground for a coyote. Dave immediately perked up and raised his rifle to look through the scope. I killed the engine and grabbed my binoculars from the center console. "What the hell is that?" Dave whispered. Through my binoculars, I could see it wasn't a deer. It wasn't anything I recognized. The creature was standing perfectly still, about 150 feet away, just at the edge of where the meadow met the trees. It was massive, taller than any man I've ever seen. If I had to guess, I'd say at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in thick, shaggy brown fur that moved slightly in the breeze. The thing that really stuck with me was this unusual pattern. It had these patches of white fur on its chest, almost like a birthmark, and another patch of white running down one arm. I've seen a lot of wildlife in Montana, and nothing has markings like that. My hands started shaking so bad I could barely hold the binoculars steady. I kept adjusting the focus, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, or the moonlight was creating some weird shadow. But no matter how many times I refocused, the image stayed the same. "Are you seeing this?" I whispered to Dave. He didn't answer for a few seconds, just kept staring through his scope. "What the fuck is that thing, Jake?" he finally said, his voice barely audible. I could hear the fear in it. The creature was just watching us. It was squinting against our spotlight, but it didn't run or hide. It stood its ground, like it wasn't afraid at all. And its face, God, its face is what keeps me up at night still. It wasn't an animal face, not really, but it definitely wasn't human either. It had this heavy, sloped forehead that jutted out over deep-set eyes that looked almost black in the spotlight. Its nose was wide and flat, and below that was this unnaturally wide mouth with thick lips. The whole face had this expression of intelligence. That's what freaked me out the most. It wasn't looking at us with the confusion of a deer in headlights. It was studying us. We sat there, frozen in the truck, and it stood there in the trees. And for what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. I could hear Dave's breathing getting faster next to me. My own heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might crack my ribs. "Should I shoot it?" Dave whispered. I remember grabbing his arm and saying, "No, no way." Something deep inside told me that would be a terrible mistake. Looking back, I'm not even sure Dave could have pulled the trigger if he wanted to. His hands were shaking almost as bad as mine. The longer we watched it, the more details I could make out. Its build was insane, shoulders broader than any bodybuilder I've ever seen, with these long, muscular arms that hung down almost to its knees. Even through all that fur, you could see the muscles underneath, especially when it shifted its weight from one foot to another. This wasn't some scrawny forest creature. It looked powerful enough to tear the door off my truck. We must have been there for at least 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. The whole time, neither of us spoke above a whisper, as if our voices might provoke it. The only sounds were our breathing and the occasional creak of the cooling engine. Then it moved. I remember flinching so hard I dropped my binoculars. But the creature wasn't coming toward us. Instead, it turned slightly to its right, where there was a barbed wire fence marking the property line between the meadow and the forest. The fence was maybe 4 feet high, not particularly tall, but enough to keep cattle in. This thing, this creature, it just stepped over that fence like it was stepping over a twig. One smooth, graceful movement. No hesitation. Its leg cleared the top wire by at least 2 feet. The way it moved didn't match its size. Something that big should be clumsy, but it wasn't. It moved with this fluid grace that reminded me of a big cat, despite being built more like a gorilla. After crossing the fence, it turned to look at us one more time. I swear to God it held my gaze for a second. Then it just melted into the trees. I could hear the faint sound of leaves and twigs crunching as it moved deeper into the forest. But the sound faded quickly, like it knew how to move silently. Dave and I sat there in complete silence for what must have been several minutes. My spotlight was still pointed at the spot where it had disappeared, like I was half expecting it to come back. Finally, Dave broke the silence. "That was no coyote," he whispered. His voice cracked when he said it. I started the truck with shaking hands. The engine noise seemed deafening after the silence. Neither of us suggested getting out to investigate, which tells you something because normally we'd be all over strange tracks or signs. But there was an unspoken agreement that we needed to get away from there. I turned the truck around and drove back to the main road much faster than I should have on that rough terrain. We didn't talk much on the way back to town. What was there to say? We'd both seen it, and neither of us had an explanation. It wasn't until we stopped at a gas station about 30 minutes later that Dave finally said more than a few words. "We saw a Sasquatch, didn't we?" he asked while I was pumping gas. He wasn't joking or smiling. His face was dead serious, and he looked pale even under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I don't know what we saw," I replied, but that was a lie. Deep down, I knew exactly what we'd seen. I just couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those deep-set eyes staring back at me. I kept replaying the encounter, analyzing every detail, wondering if there was some rational explanation I was missing. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But no bear moves like that, and no bear has that face. A man in a suit, out in the middle of nowhere in freezing temperatures. And no costume could capture the fluid movement and obvious muscle structure we saw. The next morning I called Dave. He hadn't slept either. We agreed to go back in daylight to look for tracks or hair on the fence, anything that might give us proof of what we'd seen. But when we got there around noon, the area had been disturbed. There were ATV tracks all over the meadow, and whatever prints might have been there were either trampled or impossible to distinguish. We found a few broken branches along the tree line where it had entered the forest, but nothing conclusive. No hair on the fence, no clear footprints, just our memories and the absolute certainty of what we'd witnessed. In the weeks that followed, I did some research. I found myself going down internet rabbit holes about Bigfoot sightings in Montana. There have been plenty over the years, especially in the forests around Helena. Some descriptions matched what we saw so closely it gave me chills. The white patches of fur, the height, the way it moved. I wasn't alone in what I'd seen. I told a few close friends about it, but I could tell by their faces they thought we were exaggerating or had mistaken a bear for something more exotic. After a while, I stopped bringing it up. Dave did too. But we talked about it between ourselves, trying to make sense of it. The thing that haunts me most isn't just seeing the creature. It's the feeling I had while looking at it. There was this overwhelming sense that it was just as curious about us as we were about it. That it was thinking, evaluating, deciding. When it finally walked away, it felt like it had made a choice to leave, not like it was fleeing in fear. I've been back to those woods many times since then, always in daylight, always with my rifle, and always with someone else. I've never seen it again, but I feel different in the forest now, like I'm being watched. Sometimes I'll hear a branch snap in the distance or catch a whiff of this musky animal smell that doesn't belong to any deer or elk I've ever hunted. Last summer, Dave and I were fishing at a creek about 5 miles from where we had our encounter. It was getting dark, and we were packing up to leave when we both froze at the same time. There was this feeling in the air, a heaviness that's hard to explain. Then we heard it, a sound like nothing I've heard before or since, a long, deep vocalization that wasn't quite a howl and wasn't quite a scream. It echoed through the trees and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We didn't stay to investigate. We threw our gear in the truck and got out of there fast. Neither of us said what we were thinking, but we didn't have to. We both knew. I still go hunting and fishing. I still love the outdoors. But I'm more cautious now. I pay attention to details I used to ignore. Broken branches high up on trees, unusual tracks, strange sounds in the distance. And I never, ever go spotlighting for coyotes anymore. Some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can see those eyes staring at me from the corner of my bedroom. Other times, I find myself questioning if it really happened. But then I remember Dave was there too. He saw exactly what I saw. We experienced it together, and neither of our stories has changed in the slightest since that night. I don't know what's out there in the forests of Montana. I don't know if what we saw has a scientific name or if it's something science hasn't recognized yet. All I know is that it exists, and it changed something fundamental about how I see the world. The forests I've spent my whole life exploring suddenly became unknown territory again. If you're ever out in those woods near Helena, keep your eyes open and your wits about you. There's something out there watching from the trees, something intelligent, something that's managed to stay hidden despite all our technology and exploration. And if you ever find yourself locking eyes with it across a moonlit meadow, you'll never be the same again. I know I'm not. Story 8. I've waited nearly 2 weeks to write this down, wondering if time would help make sense of what happened to me on November 12th at Willow Pond. It hasn't. If anything, my mind keeps replaying every detail more vividly as the days pass. I'm not sure if sharing this will help, but I need to tell someone what happened out there. I've been hunting for over 20 years. The forests around Willow Pond have always been my go-to spot. About 4 hours from civilization, deep enough that you rarely bump into other hunters. That Tuesday started like any other hunting day. I left home around 5 in the morning, arrived at my usual parking spot near the old abandoned rail line by 7, and spent most of the day tracking deer. The weather was decent, mid-40s, cloudy but dry. Perfect tracking conditions. I spotted some promising signs early on, fresh droppings, clear tracks in the soft ground, but by mid-afternoon, I still hadn't had any luck. Just one of those days, I figured. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to call it. The sun sets early this time of year, and I wanted to get back to my truck before dark. I've always navigated these woods using the old rail line. It's been abandoned for decades, overgrown in spots, but still visible enough to follow. It runs right alongside Willow Pond for about half a mile before cutting through denser forest. That's when I first noticed something was off. The woods were quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, unnatural silence that makes the hair on your neck stand up. No birds calling, no squirrels rustling, nothing. In 20 years of hunting, I've learned to trust that feeling when something isn't right. I picked up my pace a bit, boots crunching on the gravel between the old railroad ties. The sound seemed too loud against the silence. I remember checking my watch, 4:23, and calculating I had about 40 minutes before the light really started to fade. The first sound I heard wasn't a snap or a growl. It was footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the forest floor behind me. At first I thought maybe another hunter was heading out the same way. But the weight of those steps, they were too heavy, too measured. I'm not proud to admit the fear that instantly washed through me. Every instinct told me not to look, to just keep walking. But I couldn't help myself. I stopped, gripped my rifle tighter, and slowly turned around. The sun was starting to sink, casting long shadows through the trees. At first, all I could make out was a dark shape about 50 yards back among the trees near the rail line. My first thought was bear. We get black bears in these woods sometimes, but then it shifted its weight, and I realized it was standing upright, completely upright, on two legs. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. This thing was massive, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its body had a human-like shape, but everything about it was wrong. Too big, too powerful. It had this broad chest and shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. But what really got me were the arms. They hung down almost to its knees, much longer than any humans. The whole body was covered in dark, thick fur. Not patchy or mangy like a sick bear, but a full, dense coat that looked almost black in the fading light. The fur on its chest seemed slightly lighter, but it was hard to tell for sure with the shadows. I couldn't make out its face clearly, thank God for that. It was just slightly darker than the rest of its head, with what looked like a pronounced brow ridge. The head sat directly on those massive shoulders, barely any neck visible. What struck me most was how it moved. Despite its size, it stepped back into deeper cover with this fluid, almost graceful motion, almost silent. A creature that size should crash through underbrush, but it barely disturbed the forest around it. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it stepped back further, partially obscured by trees, still watching me. I broke eye contact first, turning and walking away as calmly as I could manage, while my heart threatened to burst out of my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but some distant memory from a nature documentary told me not to trigger a chase response. So I walked, picking up my pace gradually, my boots suddenly clumsy on the uneven rail bed. I made it about 50 yards, constantly fighting the urge to look over my shoulder when the first stone hit. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a golf ball, but it struck a railroad tie just a few feet in front of me with enough force to make me jump. Then another hit a tree trunk to my right with a sharp crack. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Rocks don't just fly through the air. But then a third stone whizzed past my ear close enough that I felt the air disturbed by its passage. Something was throwing stones at me. That's when I broke. All thoughts of not triggering a chase response vanished. I ran. My pack bounced against my back, my rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands. I didn't dare stop to look behind me, but I could hear it following, not on the rail line, but parallel to it, crashing through the underbrush about 20 yards to my left. The sounds were unmistakable. Branches snapping, vegetation being pushed aside, occasional heavy thuds as it leapt over fallen logs. It was keeping pace with me easily, maybe even gaining. More stones came flying out of the darkness, most missing, but a few striking close enough to send my heart rate even higher. The thing was herding me. That thought hit me with terrifying clarity. It wasn't just chasing me. It was directing my movement, keeping me on the rail line, guiding me somewhere. Or maybe it was just playing with me before. I couldn't finish that thought. I just ran harder. My lungs were burning. I'm in decent shape, but terror-fueled sprinting through the woods isn't something you train for. My only focus was the mental map I had of these woods. I knew my truck was parked about a quarter mile ahead where the rail line crossed an old logging road. If I could just reach it. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. Whatever this thing was, it was moving faster through dense forest than I was on a relatively clear path. Another stone struck a tree just inches from my head, showering me with bark. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. I caught just a glimpse of movement, a massive dark form slipping between trees, powerful and quick, much closer than I'd imagined, maybe 30 yards back now. The clearing appeared ahead like a miracle. I could see my truck, an old blue Chevy that never looked so beautiful. I fumbled for my keys as I ran, nearly dropping them in my panic. Behind me, the crashing sound stopped at the forest edge. Whatever was chasing me had halted at the tree line. I reached the truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. No automatic entry on this old thing, just a manual key that suddenly seemed impossible to use. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened and I threw myself inside, slamming and locking it in one motion. The cab light illuminated my face in the rearview mirror, pale, sweaty, eyes wide with fear. I started the engine with trembling hands, but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I sat there gasping for breath, eyes frantically scanning the darkening forest edge. For several long minutes, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows growing deeper as twilight settled. Then movement caught my eye near a large pine about 50 yards away. It wasn't hiding anymore. The creature stood partially visible, one massive shoulder and the side of its head exposed as it peered around the trunk. Even at that distance and in the failing light, I could feel it watching me, studying me. There was intelligence in that gaze, not animal, not fully human either, but something aware, something that knew what it was doing. I threw the truck into reverse, spun around on the narrow logging road, and drove away as fast as the rough terrain would allow. The entire drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see it loping after me on the dark road. It's been 13 days, and I haven't been back to the woods. My rifle sits cleaned and untouched in its case. My hunting gear remains packed in the garage. Friends have invited me out, but I've made excuses. Work, family obligations, anything to avoid explaining why I can't bring myself to return. I've researched everything I can find about Willow Pond and the surrounding areas. There are a few vague stories, hunters who heard strange calls, campers who felt watched, one report from the 80s about a fisherman who claimed to have seen a tall, hairy man across the pond. Nothing concrete, nothing that explains what I saw. Some nights I wake up from dreams where I'm running through endless woods, stones flying past my head, those footsteps always right behind me. Other nights I dream I'm looking into those eyes again. Not animal eyes, not human eyes, but something ancient watching me from the shadows. I don't know what I encountered out there. I've hunted my whole life and never believed in monsters, but I know what I saw wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a costume. It was something that shouldn't exist, something that walked on two legs and threw stones with purpose and intelligence. The worst part isn't the fear or the nightmares, it's the certainty that it let me go. That creature could have caught me if it wanted to. It was faster, stronger, knew the terrain better. For whatever reason, it chose to chase me away rather than do whatever it could have done. And sometimes I catch myself wondering, what if it wasn't trying to hurt me at all? What if it was warning me, protecting something deeper in those woods that I wasn't meant to find? I don't have answers. All I know is that the world is bigger and stranger than I ever imagined, and something watches from the trees around Willow Pond. Something that walks like a man, but isn't one. Something that knows we're there. I'm not going back to find out what it wants. Story 9. I've lived in rural Broom County my entire life, and I thought I knew everything about the wilderness around my home. I was wrong. So wrong. What happened to me last Wednesday night has completely shattered everything I thought I understood about these woods. I'm still shaking as I type this. I need to get it out, and I don't know where else to turn. My husband thinks I'm overreacting, and my friends from town would just laugh it off. But I know what I saw. It started during that massive snowstorm that hit us last week. Weather reports had been warning about it for days, but you know how it is living out here. We're always prepared. Our place sits about half a mile off the main road, surrounded by dense forest on three sides. It's peaceful, isolated, and normally I love it. That night, the snow had already been coming down hard for hours. My husband Tom was asleep. He works early shifts. And our 12-year-old son Ethan had finally gone to bed after trying to convince me the storm would cancel school the next day. Our dog Rusty, a big German Shepherd mix, had been restless all evening, pacing by the windows and whining occasionally, which I chalked up to him needing to go out. Around 11 p.m., I realized the snow on our front porch was piling up fast. If I didn't clear it, we'd be trapped inside by morning when it froze over. I bundled up in my heavy coat, boots and gloves, grabbed the shovel from inside the mudroom and told Rusty I'd let him out in a minute once I'd cleared a path. The moment I stepped outside, the wind slapped me in the face. The snowfall was so thick I could barely see the steps leading down from our porch. The yard lights were on, but they only created this eerie glow that made the swirling snow look like static on an old TV. The temperature must have been in the low teens, and every breath hurt my lungs. I started shoveling, trying to clear at least a small path. That's when I first felt it, this overwhelming sensation that I was being watched. Not just observed, but studied. The feeling crawled up my spine like ice water. I've lived in the country my whole life. I'm used to the normal sounds of the forest, the occasional fox or raccoon scurrying around, even the coyotes that sometimes howl in the distance. This was different. This feeling was invasive, threatening. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just the storm making me jumpy. I even started talking to Rusty through the glass storm door where he was watching me, just to hear a human voice. "Almost done, buddy. Just a few more scoops, then you can come out." Rusty was pressed against the door, his breath fogging the glass, tail wagging. He'd been inside all day because of the storm, and I knew he needed to relieve himself. Finally, I cleared enough space and opened the door to let him out. Rusty bounded past me down the steps like he always does. But then something happened that makes my skin crawl, even now thinking about it. He got about 10 feet into the yard, stopped dead in his tracks, and his entire body language changed. His tail dropped, his ears went back, and he spun around so fast he slipped in the snow. Then he bolted back toward the porch, desperately scrambling up the steps, pushing against my legs to get back inside. Rusty is fearless. This is a dog who chases deer, who once got into a standoff with a black bear that wandered onto our property, who barks at thunder like he's challenging it. I've never seen him afraid of anything. "What is it, boy?" "What's wrong?" I whispered, my voice suddenly seeming too loud in the muffled silence of the snowfall. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that something was out there watching us. My heart hammering in my chest, I forced myself to scan the yard, the tree line, the driveway. The snow was coming down in thick curtains, limiting visibility to maybe 50 feet at most. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I looked toward our long gravel driveway. There, standing partially obscured by the snowfall, were two eyes staring directly at me. Not reflecting light like a deer's or fox's eyes would. Glowing, almost amber-colored. And they were high, way too high off the ground. Higher than a person's would be if they were standing there, maybe 7 or 8 feet up. I froze. I literally couldn't move. Those eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, unwavering. They weren't moving closer, but they weren't retreating either. Just watching. For what felt like forever. Though it was probably only a minute, we stayed like that in some kind of primal standoff. My mind raced through possibilities. A deer standing on a snowbank? No, the height was wrong, and no deer would just stand there staring at a human. A hunter with a spotlight. In this storm, at night, on my private property. No way. The longer I stared, the more I could make out a massive silhouette behind those eyes. A dark shape, broader than any person I've ever seen, just standing there in the blizzard. Not moving, not making a sound, just watching me. Rusty was whimpering now, scratching at the door, desperate to get back inside. His panic broke whatever spell had paralyzed me. I backed up slowly, never taking my eyes off those glowing orbs until my hand found the door handle. Then I yanked it open, shoved Rusty inside, and practically fell in after him. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then leaned against it, gasping for breath. My whole body was trembling uncontrollably. Through the glass I could still see those eyes, still fixed on the house, still watching. Then slowly they moved. Not toward the house, but sideways, disappearing into the tree line that borders our driveway. No sound, no rush, just a deliberate retreat into the darkness. I ran through the house, checking every lock, closing all the blinds. I grabbed Tom's shotgun from the gun safe and loaded it with shaking hands, something I'd never felt the need to do before, despite having lived in this rural area my entire life. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, gun across my lap, Rusty pressed against me, both of us listening to the storm rage outside. Occasionally, Rusty would growl softly, his eyes fixed on the front door, but whatever was out there didn't try to approach the house. By morning, the snow had piled up nearly 2 feet. Tom got up and found me still in the living room, shotgun in hand. He thought I was overreacting to probably just a confused deer, or maybe a bear waking up early from hibernation. But bears don't have eyes that glow like that, and they don't stand 7 feet tall. I wanted to check for tracks, but the heavy snowfall had covered everything. There wasn't a single mark in the fresh blanket of white covering our yard. I convinced myself that maybe Tom was right. Maybe it was just the storm, the isolation, my imagination running wild. I put the gun away, made breakfast for Ethan, school was indeed cancelled, and tried to shake off the lingering dread. But then strange things started happening over the next few days. The night after the storm, around 3 in the morning, I was jolted awake by a sound I'd never heard before, a rhythmic knocking like someone striking hollow wood. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more knocks. It seemed to be coming from the side of the house near the tree line. Tom slept through it, but Rusty went berserk, barking and throwing himself against the bedroom door. The following evening, Ethan came running inside from playing in the snow, white-faced and terrified. He said he'd heard screaming from the woods, high-pitched and almost human, but not quite. Like someone trying to sound like a person but getting it wrong, were his exact words. Tom dismissed it as a fox or bobcat, but the look on Ethan's face told me it was something else. Then yesterday, I found something that made my blood run cold. I was clearing more snow from around the house when I noticed strange marks on one of the trees at the edge of our property. Long, deep gouges in the bark, about 6.5 feet up the trunk. They looked like claw marks, but massive. Each groove thick enough to put my thumb in, spaced about 4 inches apart. And they were fresh, the exposed inner bark still light-colored against the dark outer layer. I took photos of the marks with my phone. When I showed Tom, he finally started taking me seriously. He agreed they weren't made by any animal he recognized, and the height was troubling. We've lived surrounded by black bears and coyotes for years, and neither would make marks like these. Last night, I hardly slept again. Around 2 a.m., when I heard that knocking sound once more, but this time it moved, starting near the shed, then proceeding around the perimeter of our property, like whatever was making it was circling the house. Tom heard it too this time and got up to look outside, but saw nothing. I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night in the storm is still out there, watching our house, learning our routines. The way it stood there, so still, so deliberate. It wasn't just some animal wandering by. It was studying us. It was intelligent. I've lived in these mountains my whole life and never believed the old stories some of the locals tell about creatures in these woods. I always thought they were just tales to scare kids away from wandering too far. Now I'm not so sure. I keep replaying that moment in my mind. Those eyes, that massive silhouette, the way it just watched me, the way Rusty, the bravest dog I've ever known, turned and ran. And most of all, I keep thinking about how it didn't run away when it saw me. It withdrew on its own terms when it was ready to go. Tom wants to set up trail cameras around the property. I agreed, but part of me is terrified of what we might capture. What if I'm right? What if there's something out there that shouldn't exist? Something that's been living alongside us in these woods all this time, watching us while we remained oblivious. Last night I dreamed I was standing on the porch again in that same snowstorm. But in the dream, those eyes came closer and closer until I could see what they belonged to. I woke up screaming before I could make out details, but the impression of something massive and upright remained. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to tell. The police would think I'm crazy. Most of my friends and neighbors would laugh it off, but I know what I saw. And whatever it was, it's still out there in the woods around my home, watching, waiting. And sometimes when I look out into the trees at dusk, I swear I can still see those eyes, just at the edge of the tree line, staring back at me. Story 10. I've never really told this story to many people. Maybe 3 or 4 close friends over the years, and even then I'd watch their faces for that look. You know the one, where their eyes get a bit wider, but their mouth gets tighter, like they're trying to be polite, but inside they're thinking I'm either lying or crazy. So I've mostly kept it to myself, but it's been eating at me for nearly 16 years now, and I need to get it out. Maybe someone here has seen something similar. This happened back in 2008 at my property in Broom County, New York. I'd moved there about 3 years prior after my divorce. It was a nice little place. Not huge, but I had almost 4 acres of land that backed up to a decent stretch of woodland. There was a creek that ran along the edge of my property that separated my yard from the thicker forest beyond. I loved that spot. It was peaceful, beautiful in all seasons, and far enough from neighbors that I could let my German shepherd, Duke, run free without worrying about him bothering anyone. Duke was about 6 years old at the time, a gorgeous black and tan shepherd with perfect ears and the sweetest temperament you could imagine. But make no mistake, he was protective and alert. That dog could hear a delivery truck turning onto our long gravel driveway before I even caught the sound. He'd bark at deer, raccoons, the neighbor's cat, anything that moved near our property. This is important to remember for later. It was mid-October, a Tuesday afternoon around 4:30. I remember because I'd just gotten home from my shift at the hospital. I was a nurse back then, and I wanted to enjoy some fresh air before it got dark. The leaves were changing, and we'd had this amazing stretch of perfect fall weather, crisp but not cold, sunny with that golden light that makes everything look like it's in a photograph. I changed into jeans and a flannel, grabbed Duke's tennis ball, and headed out to the back of the property. We did this most days when weather permitted. I'd throw the ball, he'd chase it, and we'd both get some exercise while enjoying the outdoors. We'd been out there maybe 20 minutes when Duke got distracted by something in the brush near the creek, probably a rabbit or squirrel. While he was investigating, I walked closer to the creek edge, just taking in the scenery. The creek wasn't huge, maybe 15 feet across and 4 feet deep in the middle, but it had a nice sound to it, with the water flowing over rocks. I was standing there, just watching the water and the trees on the other side, when something caught my eye. About 100 feet away across the creek in the woods, there was movement. Not the usual movement of branches swaying in the wind, but deliberate movement. At first I thought it might be a deer, but there was something off about it. Because of the dense foliage and brush, I couldn't see whatever it was entirely, just the lower portion, maybe from what would be waist down on a person. And what I saw made my skin tingle in a way that's hard to describe. There were legs, 2 legs, standing perfectly upright. They weren't a deer's legs, they weren't a bear's legs. These were thick, straight, bipedal legs covered in this striking golden reddish-brown hair. The hair, or fur I guess, was longer than what you'd see on a deer, maybe 4 or 5 inches in length. The color wasn't like anything I'd seen in our woods before, sort of a burnt honey color with reddish highlights. Here's where it gets really strange. The moment I focused on it, the thing seemed to sense my attention. I swear I made no sound. I wasn't moving, but it just knew I was watching. I saw the legs rotate slightly, turning away from me. Then it took 3 very deliberate steps, not rushed, not panicked, just purposeful, and moved deeper into the brush until I couldn't see it anymore. Throughout those few seconds, and it really was only a few seconds, I didn't hear a single sound from it. No cracking twigs, no rustling leaves, nothing. And this was in autumn, with dry leaves everywhere. Anything moving through those woods should have made noise. The moment I realized what I might be looking at, I reached down and grabbed Duke's collar. He had wandered back to me by then, still holding his tennis ball, completely oblivious. This was the part that disturbed me almost as much as what I saw. Duke noticed nothing. This dog, who would bark furiously if a squirrel ran across our yard 50 yards away, had no reaction whatsoever to whatever was standing across the creek. I stood frozen for maybe another minute, heart pounding, waiting to see if it would return or move again. Nothing happened. The woods looked perfectly normal, peaceful even. But I knew what I'd seen. I tugged on Duke's collar, and we walked back to the house, not running, but definitely moving faster than normal. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. Once inside, I locked the door, something I rarely did during daylight, and went straight to my computer. For hours that night, I searched online for any rational explanation. Could it have been a bear? No way. I've seen plenty of bears in my life, including standing on hind legs. This wasn't that. Bear legs aren't straight when they stand upright. They look awkward and can only maintain that position briefly. What I saw was completely at ease on 2 legs, with straight, stocky limbs that moved naturally. Was it a person in some kind of costume? In the middle of the woods on a Tuesday afternoon, on private property? Who would do that? And why would they just stand there then walk away? And how would they move without making any noise? I kept coming back to one explanation that I didn't want to consider because it sounded ridiculous even in my own head, but nothing else fit. The height, what I could see, suggested something tall. The golden reddish-brown hair, the bipedal stance, the silent movement, the apparent awareness of being watched. I was thinking Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. That night I barely slept. Every noise outside had me on edge. Duke seemed totally normal, sleeping at the foot of my bed like always. By morning, I had almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it or misinterpreted something ordinary. Almost. I didn't go to the back of my property the next day, or the day after. In fact, I avoided that entire section near the creek for weeks, which turned into months, which eventually turned into years. I'm not kidding when I say I didn't go back to that specific area for almost 6 years. I'd take Duke out in the front yard or the side areas, but never back to that spot by the creek. During those years, I never heard anything unusual around my property. No strange howls at night, no wood knocking, none of the things I later read about being associated with Sasquatch. But I also never felt completely comfortable in those woods again. Something about the deliberateness of how it moved, like it was intelligent, aware, stuck with me in a way that was deeply unsettling. I eventually moved away from that property in 2014 after Duke passed away. I couldn't bear to be there without him, and honestly, there was always that lingering unease about what might be in those woods. The thing that's bothered me most over the years isn't just what I saw, but my dog's complete lack of reaction. Duke had incredible senses. He could smell other animals from amazing distances. Yet whatever was standing there, something large enough to be clearly visible to me from 100 feet away, didn't register with him at all. It's like it wasn't there for him, or it had some way of masking its presence from animals. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize what happened that day. I've considered every possible explanation, from known animals to people playing pranks to my own eyes playing tricks on me. None of them fit what I experienced. The legs I saw were humanoid, but not human, too covered in that distinctive hair. They were straight and solid, not bent and awkward like a bear standing up. The movement was smooth, deliberate, and completely silent, which rules out pretty much any large animal I know of, and there was something else about the encounter that's hard to put into words. The moment it sensed me watching, there was this awareness. Not just the awareness of an animal that hears or smells a human nearby, but something that understood it was being observed and made a conscious decision to leave. I felt noticed, evaluated, and then dismissed as it calmly walked away. I'm a rational person. I've worked in healthcare most of my life. I deal in facts, in things I can see and verify. But what I saw that day doesn't fit into my rational understanding of the world. And that's been the hardest part to reconcile. For years, I kept this to myself, afraid of the judgment and disbelief I'd face if I shared it. Even now, as I write this, part of me wants to delete everything and pretend it never happened. But it did happen. I saw what I saw. I don't know if it was a Sasquatch or Bigfoot or something else entirely. I only saw the lower half of whatever it was, but I know it wasn't anything that's supposed to exist in the forests of New York. Sometimes I think about going back to that property, finding the current owners, and asking if they've ever noticed anything strange in those woods. But what would I say? "Excuse me, have you seen a Bigfoot crossing your creek lately?" They'd think I was insane. So I've carried this experience with me, this brief moment that lasted maybe 10 seconds, but changed how I view the world. There are things out there we don't understand, things that move through the forests silently, watching us when we don't know we're being watched. The strangest part? I'm not afraid of whatever it was. Not anymore. It could have approached me, but chose not to. It could have made itself fully visible, but stayed partially hidden. It seemed to want nothing more than to be left alone, to exist in its woods undisturbed. I can respect that. But I still wonder, especially on autumn afternoons when the light hits the trees just right, is it still there? And how many other people have seen something similar but, like me, were too afraid of ridicule to ever speak up? I don't have answers, just an experience I can't explain. And the memory of those silent, hair-covered legs walking away through the golden leaves of a New York forest, leaving no trace behind except the unshakable knowledge that the world is stranger than we're willing to admit. Story 11. I've been sitting on this experience for too long, nearly 4 years to be exact. I never told anyone because honestly, who would believe me? Even typing this makes me feel ridiculous, but I need to get this out. I grew up in upstate New York, about 20 minutes from SUNY Cortland where this happened. Winter of 2019, January, during my junior year. The campus was quieter than usual because a lot of students were still on break, but I'd come back early for my part-time job at the campus library. It was around 9:30 at night when I left the library. I had a ton of reading to do for my environmental science class and stayed later than planned. The temperature had dropped to somewhere around 15 degrees, and walking to my off-campus apartment meant either taking the long way around on the lit campus paths and streets or cutting through what we called the experimental forest, a small wooded area the biology department used for research, maybe 40 to 60 acres of trees and undergrowth. I'd taken this shortcut dozens of times before. The trail starts near the athletic fields, cuts through the woods, and comes out at a farmer's field that borders Avenue B, where my apartment building sits. It usually saved me about 15 minutes of walking, which on a freezing January night seemed worth it. The campus lights faded behind me as I entered the trail. There was about 6 inches of old snow on the ground, the kind that's been there for weeks and is crusty on top. It wasn't completely dark. The stars and quarter moon reflected off the snow, giving everything this weird blue-gray glow. I could make out the path pretty well. I had my backpack loaded with textbooks, my phone was at maybe 20% battery, and I was wearing my heavy winter jacket, gloves, hat, the full upstate NY winter setup. The silence was what I noticed first. That peculiar quiet that only happens in the woods during winter, where sound seems to travel forever, but also gets swallowed up somehow. I'd gone maybe a third of the way through, probably walking for about 5 minutes, when I heard the first sounds, twigs snapping to my left and a bit behind me. Not right next to the path, more like 20 yards into the trees. My first thought was a fox or maybe someone's dog that had gotten loose. It wasn't unusual to see wildlife in these woods. I'd spotted deer, foxes, and even a fisher cat once. I kept walking, but found myself listening more intently. The sounds continued, keeping pace with me. When I slowed down slightly, the sounds slowed too. That's when my heart rate picked up. Whatever it was seemed to be paralleling my path, not coming closer but definitely tracking me. I picked up my pace a little, thinking if it was a curious animal it would eventually lose interest. But instead, the sounds got louder. Not just twigs breaking anymore, but bigger branches snapping. The movement sounded deliberate, heavy. The sound of something big pushing through undergrowth. My mouth went completely dry. I kept walking faster now, but not running. Some primitive part of my brain was screaming that running would be a mistake, that it would trigger a chase response. I'm not sure why I thought that, but in the moment, it felt crucial to keep moving steadily. The sounds continued, matching my increased pace perfectly, step for step. That's when I realized whatever was tracking me was bipedal. The rhythm was all wrong for a 4-legged animal. My mind cycled through possibilities. Another student playing a prank? A homeless person? But the height of the sounds, branches breaking well above where a normal-sized person would reach, eliminated those options. About halfway through the woods, I heard breathing. Deep, heavy breathing that wasn't labored but was definitely audible in the winter stillness. It was maybe 15 yards away now, still parallel to the path, still keeping perfect pace with me. My hands were shaking inside my gloves. I wanted desperately to pull out my phone and call someone, but I was afraid to stop or make any sudden movements. I had pepper spray in my coat pocket that my dad insisted I carry, but it felt laughably inadequate against whatever was out there. I finally gathered the courage to turn my head slightly to the left. What I saw, or what I think I saw in that split second, still haunts me. A blocky, impossibly tall figure moving through the trees. It was dark, either naturally dark or wearing dark clothing. It was hard to gauge its exact height with the uneven terrain, but it had to be approaching 9 or 10 feet tall. I only caught a glimpse before facing forward again, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The figure made no attempt to hide itself anymore. The sounds of its movement were obvious now, vegetation being pushed aside, snow being compressed under heavy footfalls. It kept pace with me, exactly, never falling behind, never coming closer, just escorting me through the woods. I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe it was a deer standing on its hind legs. Can deer even do that? Maybe I was having some kind of stress hallucination, but the sounds were real. The breathing was real. The presence was undeniably real. I remember the cold air burning my lungs as I tried to keep my breathing steady. My legs felt wooden, but I forced them to keep moving at a brisk walk. The path ahead seemed to stretch forever, even though I knew I was more than halfway through by now. The trees crowded closer to the path in this section, their bare branches reaching overhead like skeletal fingers. Then something changed. The thing, whatever it was, stopped mirroring my pace and moved slightly ahead of me, still parallel to the path. It was anticipating where I was going. I could hear it moving faster, branches cracking more frequently. The breathing grew louder. I kept my eyes locked on the path in front of me, focusing on each step, willing myself not to run yet. Not yet. The edge of the woods was maybe 5 minutes away at my current pace. I could make it. I had to make it. My foot caught on a root hidden under the snow, and I stumbled slightly, not enough to fall, but enough to make me gasp involuntarily. The movement in the trees suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell. I froze too. My breath caught in my throat. For what felt like forever but was probably 10 seconds, nothing moved. Then I heard a deep, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a groan, but something in between. It was a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew, deep enough that I could almost feel the vibration of it in my chest. That sound broke my paralysis. I started walking again, faster now, almost a jog, but not quite. The thing resumed its pace too, keeping parallel but slightly ahead of me now. I could see the tree line ahead, maybe 200 yards away. Beyond it was the open field, then the streetlights of Avenue B. Those last 200 yards were the longest of my life. The thing kept pace, its breathing audible even over my own ragged breaths. I couldn't help myself anymore. I glanced quickly to the left again. This time I saw it more clearly. It was massive, its shoulders impossibly broad. It moved with a strange fluidity for something so large, weaving between trees with disturbing grace. When I caught that glimpse of it, it turned its head toward me. I couldn't make out facial features in the darkness, just a large, blocky head. But I felt it looking at me. I felt its intention, its focus, like a physical weight. I reached the edge of the woods, where the trees give way to the open field. Without conscious thought, I broke into a full sprint. I don't remember my feet touching the ground. I don't remember crossing the field. I just remember running, my backpack bouncing painfully against my spine, my lungs burning, tears streaming down my face from the cold and the fear. I didn't look back, not once. I ran across that field and kept running along Avenue B until I reached a McDonald's that was still open. I burst through the doors, probably looking like a complete maniac, face flushed, breathing hard, wild-eyed. I ordered a coffee with shaking hands just to have a reason to be there and sat in the brightest, most populated corner I could find. I stayed for over an hour until my heartbeat finally slowed and I felt brave enough to call my roommate to come pick me up. I never told her what happened. I never told anyone. What would I say? Hey, I think a 10-foot monster stalked me through the experimental forest. I'd sound insane. I've spent countless hours researching since then, looking up local wildlife, reading about bears standing on hind legs, though there shouldn't have been bears active in January, searching for any logical explanation. I've even reluctantly looked into Bigfoot sightings in upstate New York, finding more reports than I expected from the Adirondacks, and even some from areas not far from Cortland. I never took that shortcut again. I dropped the environmental science class that would have required field work in those woods. I started driving to campus instead of walking, even on nice days. My roommates teased me about suddenly becoming too good to walk, but I couldn't explain the real reason. Sometimes I convinced myself it was just my imagination, stress from school manifesting as a panic attack with hallucinations. But then I remember the breathing, the deliberate way it moved, the feeling of being watched, assessed, followed. It was real. I know it was real. The strangest part. It never actually threatened me. It could have easily caught me at any point in that walk. It was faster, stronger, whatever it was, but it just escorted me, like it was making sure I passed through its territory safely, or maybe it was warning me to stay out. I've since graduated and moved away from Cortland, but I still get chills when I think about those woods at night. Sometimes I dream about it, that massive, dark figure moving through the trees beside me. In my dreams, sometimes I stop walking and turn to face it directly, but I always wake up before I can see what happens next. I'm still not sure what I encountered that night. Part of me hopes I never find out. But I know for certain I'll never walk through those woods alone at night again. Story 12. I've debated posting this for a long time. Most of my buddies think I'm crazy or that I drank too much that weekend, but I know what I saw. I'm not some attention seeker or someone who believes every weird story they hear. I'm just a regular guy who loves hunting and has spent 23 years in those Oklahoma woods. What happened last October changed everything I thought I knew about those forests. I'm a pretty experienced hunter, been doing it since I was 12, and at 41, I know my way around a rifle and the wilderness. I'm not the type to spook easily either. I'm 6'2", 260 pounds, and I've faced down angry boars that could gut a man in seconds. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered in Love Valley. 5 of us went out that weekend, me, my brother-in-law Dale, and 3 guys from my work. We'd been planning this hog hunting trip for months. Feral hogs are a real problem in Oklahoma, tearing up farmland and causing all kinds of ecological damage. Plus, they make for good eating if you get a young one. We set up camp on Friday afternoon in Love Valley Wildlife Management Area, a place I'd hunted dozens of times before. Saturday morning started like any other hunting day. Up before dawn, quick breakfast of instant coffee and protein bars, checking our gear and heading out to our stands. We split up to cover more ground, keeping in radio contact. I'd picked a spot about half a mile from our camp, on the edge of a clearing, with a good view of a game trail the hogs frequently used. The morning was chilly, probably around 45 degrees, with that crisp fall air that makes you feel alive. The first few hours were uneventful. Saw some deer, a couple of turkeys, but no hogs. Around 10 in the morning, I decided to relocate. The wind had shifted, and I figured my scent might be blowing toward the trail. I radioed the guys to let them know I was moving about 300 yards northeast toward a ridge that overlooked another clearing. I settled into my new position, resting against a large oak with my Remington 308 across my lap. Perfect spot with good visibility and the wind in my favor. About half an hour later, I caught a whiff of something strong, kind of like cat piss mixed with skunk spray and something rotting. My first thought was that it must be a big boar crossing the ridge above me. Those old males can stink to high heaven, especially during rutting season. I radioed Dale. "Think I got a big one moving along the north ridge. Going to circle around and see if I can get a shot." "Copy that," he responded. "Want backup?" "Nah, I got this. Stay on your position in case he heads your way." In hindsight, maybe I should have taken him up on that offer. I moved quietly, about 60 yards down the base of the ridge, away from where the others were positioned. There was a game trail that cut up the slope, well worn from years of deer and hogs using it. The smell was getting stronger, which told me I was on the right track. I began my ascent, moving slowly and deliberately, keeping my eyes peeled and my rifle ready. I was about halfway up the slope when something flew through the air about 5 yards to my right, landing with a thud in the leaves. Before I could even process what it was, another object, heavier by the sound of it, landed a few yards to my left. I froze immediately, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. My first thought was that one of the guys was messing with me, maybe Dale trying to pull a prank. I scanned the ridgeline carefully with my eyes first, then brought my scope up for a better look. Nothing, just trees, brush, and shadows. The forest had gone oddly quiet too. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the unexpected surge of adrenaline. I told myself it was probably just some dead branches falling, though the timing seemed odd. I continued upward, moving even more cautiously now, every sense on high alert. That's when it happened. A large piece of rock slammed into the ground, literally at my feet, with enough force that I felt the impact through my boots. It rolled downhill, crashing through the underbrush. This was no accident, no falling branch. Something had thrown that rock, thrown it hard and with incredible accuracy. In that same moment, as my eyes instinctively tracked the rock's path downhill, I caught the faintest movement from the corner of my eye. When I looked up about 40 yards ahead and slightly above me on the ridge, I made out a shape that my brain initially couldn't process. It looked like a person, but the proportions were all wrong, way too big. My first coherent thought was, is that a bear standing upright? But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't right. Oklahoma black bears don't get that large, and they don't stand like that. I raised my rifle scope to my eye, my hands suddenly unsteady. Through the magnification, I could see it more clearly now. The creature was partially concealed by vegetation, but its head and upper chest were visible enough. It was covered in dark, shaggy fur, not quite black, more of a dark brown or deep auburn. The wind was moving the brush around it, partially breaking up its silhouette, but I could still make out the basic shape. Its head was oblong, almost conical, sitting directly on massive shoulders with seemingly no neck, and its eyes, they seemed impossibly small for the size of its head, deep set under a heavy brow ridge. I couldn't make out many facial features, but the shape was unmistakably humanoid. There's just no other word for it. I'm not ashamed to admit that in that moment I was terrified. This thing was enormous. I'm a big guy myself, but this creature had to be 9 or 10 feet tall at minimum, and at least 3 to 4 times as broad as my own frame. Its shoulders were wider than a refrigerator. Time seemed to stretch in that moment. I don't know how long I stood there, rifle scope to my eye, staring at this impossible creature, but it was probably only about a minute. My mind was racing, cycling through possibilities. A man in a suit? No way. We were miles from any road, and who would wear something like that during hunting season? A bear? Definitely not. Some kind of unknown primate? In Oklahoma? It seemed absurd, but what I was seeing was there. Real. Watching me with what felt like intelligence. The rock it had thrown, and I was now certain it had thrown it, would have hit me squarely if its aim had been just slightly better. Or maybe that wasn't the intention. Maybe it was a warning. My mouth was bone dry, and I realized I was holding my breath. I began to slowly, carefully back down the hill. One step, pause, another step, pause. After my third step backward, the creature moved. It turned, slowly and deliberately, away from me. It didn't run or charge or make any aggressive movement. It simply turned and walked in the opposite direction, moving with surprising grace for something so massive. It was dismissing me. That's the only way I can describe it. Like I wasn't worth its time, rifle and all. Like I wasn't a threat. I stood frozen for another minute after it disappeared from view. Then I began backing down the hill much more quickly, never taking my eyes off the spot where I'd seen it. When I reached the bottom, I turned and half jogged, half ran back toward where Dale was positioned. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost when I reached him. Jesus, Marcus, what happened? You see a mountain lion or something? Dale asked, genuinely concerned. I couldn't even form the words at first. Something threw rocks at me up on the ridge. Dale looked at me like I was losing it. What? One of the guys playing a joke. No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Something big, really big. Come on, I want to show you something. We made our way back to the spot, though I made sure we approached from a different angle downwind of where I'd seen the creature. The smell was still present, but fainter now. When we reached the place where the rock had landed, I found it easily. A chunk of limestone about the size of a basketball. Dale and I both looked at it, then at each other. You're saying something threw this at you? He asked, bending down to examine it. I nodded. Pick it up. Dale tried to lift it with one hand, couldn't, then used both hands to heft it. Jesus, this thing's heavy as hell. Later, back at camp, we weighed it on the scale we use for game. 48 pounds. 48 pounds of solid rock, thrown with enough force and accuracy to nearly hit me from at least 40 yards away. I'm a strong guy, and I know I couldn't throw something that heavy with anywhere near that kind of distance or precision. I told the others what I'd seen. They listened politely enough, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Tom suggested maybe it was another hunter playing a dangerous prank. Mike wondered if I'd seen a bear and misjudged its size due to the angle and shadows. Dale was the only one who seemed genuinely puzzled, having seen the rock himself. We stayed one more night, but I barely slept. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had me wide awake, staring into the darkness outside our tents. The next morning, we packed up early and headed home. Nobody complained about cutting the trip short. In the weeks since, I've done a lot of research. I've read accounts from other hunters and hikers who've had similar experiences across North America. I've looked at reports of Bigfoot or Sasquatch sightings in Oklahoma and neighboring states. I never thought I'd be one of those people searching for evidence of cryptids, but here I am. What I saw that day wasn't a bear, wasn't a man in a costume, wasn't a hallucination. It was something unknown, something powerful, something intelligent enough to use tools, those rocks, to warn me away from its territory. And it worked. I haven't been back to Love Valley since, and I'm not sure I ever will hunt alone again. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, the memory of those small, deep-set eyes staring at me from that massive fur-covered face still vivid in my mind. I can still smell that distinctive odor, still feel the impact of that rock hitting the ground at my feet. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told me this story. But I know what I saw, and I know there's something out there in those Oklahoma woods that science hasn't classified yet. Something that can pick up a 50-pound rock and hurl it like it's a baseball. Something that looked at an armed human and decided we weren't worth the trouble. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not that this creature exists, but that it's been there all along, watching us from the shadows as we stumble through its world, completely unaware. Story 13. I've gone back and forth for years about whether to post this. I've never been a person who tells ghost stories or makes up stuff for attention. I'm not into paranormal shows or conspiracy theories. I was just a normal kid who experienced something I couldn't explain, and honestly, it messed me up for a long time. This happened in upstate New York when I was 11, back in the 90s. We lived in a small house on the eastern shore of Oneida Lake, right near Verona Beach State Park. It was a quiet area, especially in the fall when the summer tourists cleared out. Our house wasn't anything special, just a single-story place with a big storage room in the back where my stepdad kept his tools, and we had our deep freezer. My bedroom was on the side of the house facing our neighbor's place, maybe 30 feet away. There was a streetlight between our properties that lit up the whole area at night. I actually needed heavy curtains just to sleep, but that night, it was a couple days before Halloween, I'd forgotten to close them all the way. I remember it was a Thursday night because my mom and stepdad both worked late shifts at the factory in Rome. They wouldn't be home until around 3 in the morning, which wasn't unusual. I was old enough to stay by myself, and anyway, we lived in the kind of place where nobody locked their doors. I went to bed around 10 o'clock. I remember checking the clock on my nightstand because I was trying to finish a chapter in this Goosebumps book before lights out. The irony isn't lost on me now. I switched off my lamp but couldn't fall asleep right away. The streetlight was pouring through my window where the curtains were open a bit, making the room bright enough that I could have kept reading if I wanted to. I was just lying there, staring at the ceiling, when everything changed. A shadow appeared on my wall. Not just any shadow, a massive, hulking silhouette that covered nearly the entire wall. It was so sudden that at first my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The shadow was perfectly defined against my blue wallpaper, which meant whatever was casting it had to be right outside my window. My window was about 6 feet off the ground. My stepdad had installed a flower box below it earlier that summer, and I remember him needing the stepladder to reach it. Whatever was casting this shadow had to be standing right there, and it had to be huge, at least 8 feet tall, probably taller. The shadow had a distinctly human-like shape, but the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms too long, and the head was weird. not round like a person's, but sort of pointed at the top. I could see what looked like fur or hair sticking out in places. I couldn't move. It sounds fake when people say they were frozen with fear, but that's exactly what happened to me. I couldn't scream, couldn't call out, couldn't even pull my blanket over my head. I just lay there, staring at this enormous shadow on my wall, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The shadow stayed there for what felt like forever, but was probably more like 20 or 30 seconds. It didn't move much, just slight adjustments, like whatever was casting it was shifting its weight or maybe turning its head to look around. Then, without warning, it disappeared. I still couldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I just lay there, eyes fixed on the wall where the shadow had been, waiting for it to come back. 3 or 4 minutes passed, I know because I watched each minute tick by on my digital clock. When I heard the first crash from the back of the house, it was so loud that it actually shook my bed. It sounded like splintering wood and twisting metal all at once. I knew immediately it was coming from our back storage room, maybe 40 feet from my bedroom. Then I heard another crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy objects being thrown around. The noises were so violent that I thought the whole house might come down. There was a rhythmic banging, like something really heavy being repeatedly slammed against the wall or floor. I heard what sounded like our deep freezer being opened. It had this distinctive squeak that always annoyed my mom. More crashing followed. Then the sound of items being moved around inside the freezer. It was like someone was sorting through the contents, but with no concern for being quiet or careful. I heard what sounded like bricks being thrown across the room. That's the only way I can describe it. Just heavy, solid objects hitting walls and the floor. This went on for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Finally, there was one last tremendous slam. The freezer lid closing, and then silence. Complete, absolute silence. I still couldn't move. I lay there in my bed, tears running down my face, convinced that whatever had been outside my window was now inside our house and would come for me next. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been. At least when I could hear it, I knew where it was. I don't know how long I stayed like that, maybe hours. I was too terrified to get up and check what had happened, too scared to even reach for my bedside lamp. I just lay there in the semi-darkness, waiting, listening. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion, because the next thing I remember is being jolted awake by the sound of my parents coming home. I heard their car pull into the driveway, then the front door opening, and then my mum screaming. I ran out of my bedroom to find them standing at the entrance to the storage room, looking horrified. The heavy wooden door that had separated the storage room from the rest of the house was completely gone. Not just open, but torn off its hinges and lying in pieces on the floor. The metal hinges were bent and twisted, like they'd been pulled apart by something incredibly strong. The storage room itself was destroyed. It was a big space, maybe 16 by 32 feet, and it looked like a tornado had hit it. My stepdad's heavy roll-away toolbox, the kind mechanics use that weighs hundreds of pounds, had been flipped over and shoved against the far wall. Tools were scattered everywhere, but the worst was the freezer. It was still closed, but something had dragged it about 8 feet from where it usually sat. The contents had been partially emptied onto the floor. Packages of frozen meat were everywhere, some still frozen solid, others starting to thaw in puddles of bloody water. "What the hell happened?" my stepdad kept saying, over and over. He thought we'd been robbed, but it didn't make any sense. Our TV and stereo were still in the living room. My mum's jewelry was untouched. The only things missing, as far as we could tell, were 2 frozen turkeys my mom had bought on sale for Thanksgiving, and several packages of frozen strawberries. Who breaks into a house and steals frozen food, but leaves everything else? My mom kept asking. She was on the phone with the police, trying to explain what had happened, but I could tell from her tone that she was struggling to make it sound rational. While they were dealing with that, I noticed something else. There were scratches on the side of the freezer and its lid. Not deep gouges, but distinct marks that looked like they'd been made by something with claws or really long fingernails. I found similar marks on the outside of the house near the storage room door and on the door itself. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. They walked through the house, took photos, and asked a lot of questions. They seemed just as confused as we were. One officer suggested it might have been a bear, but my stepdad pointed out that a bear couldn't have opened the freezer so carefully or been selective about what it took. Besides, we rarely had bears in our area, especially that close to houses. As they were leaving, our neighbor Mr. Jennings came over. He was in his late 60s and had lived next door forever. He told the police he'd been up late watching TV and had seen what he described as a big shadow moving between our houses around midnight. He said his dog, a German shepherd that usually barked at everything, had started whining and refused to go outside when he tried to let him out to investigate. "I've never seen him act like that," Mr. Jennings said, like he was terrified of something out there. Throughout all of this, I hadn't said a word about the shadow on my wall. I was scared they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they would, and it would somehow make the whole thing more real. I just stood there, listening to them try to make sense of something that didn't make any sense. The police finally left, telling us to call if we remembered anything else. My parents spent the rest of that night cleaning up the mess and trying to salvage what they could. They assumed someone had broken in, maybe looking for money or drugs, and had torn apart the storage room in frustration when they didn't find anything valuable. My stepdad installed a new, stronger door the next day and added deadbolts to all our exterior doors. My mum threw away all the food that had been in the freezer, saying she couldn't stand the thought of eating anything that had been touched by whoever did this. I didn't sleep in my room for weeks afterward. I told my parents I was scared because of the break-in, and they let me sleep on the couch. I never told them about the shadow, about how whatever had torn apart our storage room had been standing right outside my window first, looking in at me. For years afterward, I slept with my curtains tightly closed and a baseball bat under my bed. I couldn't stand being alone in the house after dark. My parents eventually chalked it up to normal childhood fears after a traumatic event, but it was more than that. I knew we hadn't been visited by some random burglar or even a bear. It wasn't until I was in college that I came across an article about Bigfoot sightings in upstate New York. There was a description of an encounter near Oneida Lake in the 70s where something had broken into a hunting cabin and taken only the food, ignoring valuable hunting equipment. The witness described hearing heavy footsteps and seeing a massive shadow pass by the window. Reading that was like having ice water dumped over me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't crazy. What I had seen, what had terrorized me that night, matched descriptions other people had given of encounters with these creatures. The height, the strange proportions, the strength, the interest in food but not valuables, it all fit. I've spent years researching similar incidents since then. There are dozens of reports from the Adirondack region and around the Finger Lakes of break-ins, where only food was taken, often accompanied by sightings of extremely tall, hair-covered figures. Many reports mention the creatures having a particular fondness for berries and fruit, just like the strawberries that were taken from our freezer. I'm 37 now, with kids of my own. We live in Pennsylvania, far from Oneida Lake. But I still can't sleep with the curtains open. I still check the locks twice before going to bed. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the house at night and I hear an unexpected sound, I feel that same paralyzing fear I felt as an 11-year-old boy, watching an impossible shadow loom across my bedroom wall. The worst part isn't the memory of what happened. It's knowing these things are out there, moving through the forests at night, occasionally coming close to our homes when they're hungry or curious, and knowing that if you encounter one, nobody will believe you. That's why I've never told this story until now. Story 14. I've been meaning to share this for years, but I never thought anyone would believe me. Hell, my own dad didn't believe me when it happened, and I was just a scared 14-year-old kid. This happened back in November 1992 in Naples, New York. I'm 39 now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. It was cold as hell that morning. The kind of cold that stings your face and makes your fingers numb, even through your gloves. My dad had gotten permission to hunt on this prime property owned by some guy he worked with. I was too young for a hunting license, so my job was to be the pusher, basically walk through the woods and scare deer toward where my dad was waiting with his rifle. We got there well before daylight. I remember the stars were still out, and my breath was making these huge clouds in the beam of my flashlight. Dad dropped me off and told me to head west into the woods while he drove about 200 yards up the road to take his position. There had been snow the day before, just patches really, but enough to make everything feel extra quiet. I wasn't scared of being alone in the woods. I'd been doing this with my dad since I was like 10, and I knew these forests pretty well. But something felt different that day. Maybe it was just the cold, or maybe it was something else. I don't know. As the sky started getting lighter, I found myself walking through this really thick brush in a shallow gully. On both sides were these ridges, maybe 20 feet high. I was getting pretty tired from pushing through all that crap. Thorn bushes catching my jeans, fallen logs that I had to climb over, the usual stuff. So after about an hour of this, I decided to climb up the ridge on my left to get some easier walking and maybe spot some deer tracks. When I got to the top, I found this massive fallen tree. It must have been down for years because moss was growing all over it. I sat down against it to catch my breath and take a drink from my water bottle. I had a clear view of pretty much everything around me. The gully I'd just come out of, the opposite ridge, and the forest stretching away behind me. The sun was fully up now, coming through the trees in these golden shafts that lit up the patches of snow. I must have dozed off for a minute or two. You know how it is when you're a teenager. You can fall asleep anywhere. What woke me up was the sound of a branch snapping, not like a twig under someone's foot, but like a serious branch being broken, like the sound when a tree comes down after a storm. My eyes shot open, and I looked to my left toward the sound. That's when I saw it. Standing on the opposite ridge, maybe 30 feet away, was this figure. I say figure because my brain couldn't process what I was seeing as human or animal. It was huge, massive, standing upright on two legs, but it wasn't a person. No way. It was covered in this dark, heavy fur or hair. Not like a bear's fur, which is sort of uniform. This was shaggy in places, particularly hanging down from its face, but seemed shorter, or maybe just more matted on its torso. Around its shoulders and thighs, the color was lighter, not quite brown, more like a dirty blonde. I couldn't see its face clearly because of all that tangled hair hanging down, but I could see its breath moving through the facial hair. Each exhale would make the hair around what I guess was its mouth move outward slightly. This thing was tall, really tall. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had to be between 7 and 9 feet. My dad is 6'2", and this thing would have towered over him, and it was built like nothing I've ever seen. Probably 400 or 500 pounds, but not fat, just massive. But what really freaked me out were its arms. They were way too long for its body, hanging down almost to its knees, and they looked powerful, like it could tear a small tree out of the ground if it wanted to. I don't know how long I sat there frozen against that log. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a couple of minutes. I was terrified to move. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking, if I don't move, maybe it won't see me, like a little kid playing hide and seek. But it was looking right at me. I'm sure of it, even though I couldn't see its eyes. Then it did something that sent pure panic through my entire body. It took one step toward me, just one. It didn't make a sound except for the leaves crunching under its foot. But that one step was all it took. Something in my brain just snapped and I ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast before or since. I didn't look back. I didn't think about direction. I just ran away from that thing as fast as humanly possible. There was this fence line I had struggled to climb over earlier that morning. It was like 5 feet high, and I swear I jumped over it without even slowing down. Pure adrenaline. I hit the road and just kept running toward where we'd parked the car. When I got there, I realized it was locked. My dad had the keys. I was trapped outside, hyperventilating, scanning the tree line, expecting that thing to come bursting out of the woods any second. I remember crouching down behind the car, trying to make myself as small as possible. I was crying, which was embarrassing even though no one was around to see it. But I couldn't help it. I was completely terrified in a way I'd never experienced before. I waited by that car for what seemed like forever. The sun got higher, but it didn't make me feel any safer. Every sound from the forest made me jump. A squirrel ran across the road, and I nearly pissed myself. Eventually, I climbed on top of the car, thinking that might be safer than being on the ground. It was almost 3 hours later when my dad finally showed up. He had this annoyed look on his face, probably because I'd scared off all the deer by running through the woods like a maniac. Before he could even say anything, I just started rambling about what I'd seen. I was talking so fast and probably not making much sense, but I needed him to understand. He didn't believe me, not even a little bit. He said I must have seen a bear standing up, or maybe a man in dark clothes. He said I was cold and tired, and that my imagination had gotten the best of me. He even laughed a little, which hurt more than if he'd been angry. "Jason," he said, "there's nothing out there in these woods that isn't supposed to be there. I've been hunting here for 20 years, but I knew what I saw wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have that body shape. And it definitely wasn't a person. No human is built like that or moves like that." The way it looked at me, there was an intelligence there, a presence. The weird thing is, I had never even heard of Bigfoot back then. This was before the internet was everywhere, before all those TV shows about hunting for cryptids. It wasn't until a few years later when I saw a documentary that I realized what I might have encountered. For weeks after it happened, I had nightmares. I'd wake up sweating, convinced that thing was standing in my room, watching me. I refused to go hunting with my dad again that season, which disappointed him. I think he thought I was just being a typical moody teenager, but I was genuinely traumatized. Over the years, I've told this story to a few close friends, and their reactions have been mixed. Some think it's cool, some think I'm lying or misremembering, and some seem uncomfortable, like they don't want to consider the possibility that something like that could actually exist. My wife knows the story, and she's one of the few people who doesn't immediately dismiss it. She says whatever I saw, my fear was real. I've gone back to Naples a few times as an adult. Those woods don't seem as mysterious or frightening in the daylight when you're a grown man. But I've never gone back to that specific hunting spot. I couldn't even if I wanted to. My dad doesn't work with that guy anymore, and I wouldn't remember exactly where it was anyway. Sometimes I wonder if that thing is still out there, or if there are more of them. I wonder if other people have seen it and, like me, were too afraid or embarrassed to talk about it. I've read stories online from people who've had similar encounters, and there's a comfort in knowing I'm not alone, but also a creepiness to it. If all these people are seeing similar things in different parts of the country, what does that mean? I think the hardest part about an experience like this is the not knowing. Not knowing exactly what I saw, not knowing if I was in actual danger or if it was just as curious about me as I was terrified of it. Not knowing if I'll ever see something like that again, or if it was a once-in-a-lifetime encounter. What I do know is that something exists in those woods that science hasn't classified. Something that walks on 2 legs but isn't human. something intelligent enough to stay hidden most of the time, and something strong enough that I'm thankful it didn't decide to come after me when I ran. I still go hiking and camping, but I always have this awareness now, this feeling of being watched that I never had before that day. And whenever I'm in the woods and hear a branch snap, for just a split second, I'm 14 years old again, sitting against that log, looking into the face of something that shouldn't exist. The strangest part? Sometimes I wish I could see it again. Now that I'm older, I think I would handle it differently. I wouldn't run. I'd try to observe it, maybe even communicate somehow. But then I remember the primal fear I felt, the kind of fear that's programmed into your DNA from thousands of years of human evolution. And I'm not so sure. If you've ever had a similar experience, I'd like to hear about it. And if you think I'm crazy or making this up, that's fine too. I don't have proof. I only have my memory and the absolute certainty that on that cold November morning, I came face to face with something that forever changed how I see the world. Story 15. Il Perdicio. I've debated whether to share this for months. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. But I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating away at me, making me question everything I thought I knew about the world around us. This happened last November when I was working the late shift for Miami County Highway Patrol in Kansas. I've been an officer for 8 years now, and I've always prided myself on being level-headed. Growing up on a farm taught me to be observant, to notice details, to understand animal behavior. I've spent most of my life outdoors, hiking, camping, hunting, so I know our local wildlife inside and out. I've seen some unusual animals in my time, a mountain lion crossing a field at dusk, albino squirrels that look almost ghostly against the trees, even a melanistic deer once that was so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. Each time, I've documented what I saw, researched it, categorized it in my mental library of natural experiences. But what happened that night doesn't fit anywhere in that library. It was around 11 o'clock, and my shift had just ended. I was driving my personal vehicle home, a 2014 Ford F-150, and I was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes after a 10-hour shift where nothing happens, but you have to stay alert anyway. The temperature had dropped into the low 30s, and there was that crisp winter feeling in the air, though we hadn't had snow yet. The roads were clear, traffic was non-existent, and all I could think about was getting home, taking a hot shower, and crawling into bed. I was about 15 minutes from my house, passing by that old sanitation department building that sits back from Highway 169. You know the place if you're from around here. It's set back maybe 100 yards from the road, with those floodlights that cast everything in this sickly yellow glow. There's a 4-foot chain-link fence that runs along the property line, separating it from the drainage ditch that parallels the highway. My headlights were on bright, since there wasn't any oncoming traffic, and I was probably doing about 65 miles per hour. My mind was half on autopilot, thinking about whether I had any leftovers in the fridge, when something caught my eye to the right of the road. At first, it was just movement, something large moving quickly. My brain started cycling through the usual suspects: deer, coyote, maybe even a loose cow from one of the nearby farms. But within a split second, I realized this wasn't anything I recognized. What I saw was a massive figure, unmistakably bipedal, moving with incredible speed parallel to the road. It was straddling that 4-foot fence by the drainage ditch, and this is what really got me. It cleared that fence without breaking stride. Not jumping over it like a human would need to do, but stepping over it like you or I might step over a garden hose, in a single fluid motion. The creature was enormous. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It had a bulk to it that made it look solid, powerful, broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. But it wasn't lumbering or awkward. It moved with this unsettling grace, eating up distance with each stride, in a way that seemed impossible for something so large. And the fur, I could see it clearly in my headlights. It wasn't the dark brown or black that you typically hear about in these stories. It was a dirty blonde color, almost like hay that's been left out in the sun too long. It covered the creature's entire body as far as I could tell, though I never got a clear look at its face. The fur seemed to move with it, flowing slightly with each powerful stride. The whole sighting lasted maybe 3 seconds. By the time my brain had processed what I was seeing, I'd already driven past it. I immediately hit the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck. The November air hit me like a slap, but I barely noticed. I was scanning the area where I'd seen the creature, sweeping my flashlight back and forth across the fence line and into the field beyond. There was nothing there, no movement, no sound, but the distant hum of the sanitation plant's generators and the occasional car passing on the highway. Part of me wanted to call it in. I had my radio, and I could have reported a suspicious sighting. But what would I say? That I saw something that looked like a Sasquatch crossing the highway? That I, a sworn officer who's supposed to deal in facts and evidence, had seen something that isn't supposed to exist? I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I got back in my truck and drove to the next exit, turned around, and came back. I drove slowly past the spot, my window down despite the cold, looking and listening for anything unusual. Nothing. I pulled over again and shone my flashlight into the fields on both sides of the highway. The area is mostly open farmland with patches of trees along the property lines. The nearest houses were about half a mile down the road, and I realized with a chill that whatever I'd seen had been running away from those homes. After about 20 minutes of searching and finding nothing, no tracks, no broken branches, no sign that anything unusual had passed through, I got back in my truck and drove home. My hands were shaking the entire way, not just from the cold, but from a kind of fundamental shock that comes when your understanding of reality gets challenged. I live alone in a house at the end of a long driveway, surrounded by about 10 acres of land, with woods behind the property. I've always loved the privacy, the quiet. That night I hated it. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound from outside made me jump. I double-checked all the locks, closed all the blinds, and even pushed my dresser in front of the bedroom door. I felt ridiculous doing it. I'm a grown man, a police officer for Christ's sake, but I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed with my service weapon on the nightstand, scrolling through my phone, researching Sasquatch sightings in Kansas. I'd always dismissed these stories as misidentifications or hoaxes. Now, I was desperately looking for information, for confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. The next morning, I drove back to the spot in daylight. I walked along the fence line, looking for any evidence, broken branches, unusual tracks, tufts of hair caught on the chain link. Nothing. The ground was too hard for tracks, and the grass along the ditch had been recently mowed by county maintenance. I've spent the last 3 months trying to rationalize what I saw. Could it have been a person in a costume? Absolutely not. No human could move that fast with that gait, or clear a 4-foot fence without breaking stride. A bear standing on its hind legs. We don't have bears in this part of Kansas, and even if we did, they don't run on 2 legs for extended periods, especially not with the fluid motion I witnessed. Some kind of optical illusion caused by fatigue and the headlights? Maybe. But I've been tired thousands of times in my life and never hallucinated something so specific and detailed. I'm left with a conclusion that goes against everything I've been taught to believe. I saw a Sasquatch that night. Or something so similar to what people describe as a Sasquatch that the distinction doesn't matter. It was real, it was there, and it has fundamentally changed how I see the world. I haven't told anyone at work. I haven't filed a report. I haven't even told my closest friends. How could I? In my profession, credibility is everything, but I can't stop thinking about it. I find myself taking different routes home, hoping to see it again. I've installed game cameras on my property. I've started researching cryptozoology, a field I used to dismiss as pseudoscience. The most unsettling part isn't the creature itself. It's the realization that there are things out there that we don't understand. Things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we think we know. I used to believe I had a solid grasp on the natural world, especially in the area where I've lived my entire life. Now I feel like a tourist in a foreign country, suddenly aware that I don't speak the language as well as I thought I did. The creature didn't seem aggressive. It was moving away from me, away from the houses down the road. But I can't help wondering, what was it doing near those homes? Was it just passing through, or was it looking for something? And how many more of these things might be out there, moving through our world when we're not looking, or when we're looking but not seeing? I've gone back to that spot at least a dozen times since that night, always around the same time, hoping to catch another glimpse. Nothing. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if stress and fatigue created a perfect storm of misperception. But then I remember the clarity of that moment, the way the fur moved in the wind, the impossible fluid stride as it cleared the fence, the sheer size of it silhouetted against the night sky. Those aren't the fuzzy details of a hallucination or a dream. Those are the sharp edges of a memory that won't fade no matter how much I want it to. I've started keeping a journal of unusual sightings or sounds in the area. Neighbors reporting strange noises at night, livestock acting nervous for no apparent reason, dogs barking at empty fields. It's probably nothing, just the heightened awareness that comes after a shock to the system. But part of me wonders if I'm starting to see the edges of something that's been there all along, hidden in plain sight. Last week I was driving home on a different route. I vary my path now, partly out of lingering fear and partly out of hope for another sighting, when I noticed something odd. About 2 miles from my house, there's a small creek that runs under the road through a large concrete culvert. As I drove past, my headlights illuminated what looked like a crude shelter built inside the mouth of the culvert, branches and brush arranged in a way that couldn't have been accidental. It was too deliberate, too structured to be debris collected by water flow. I pulled over and walked down to investigate, but as I got closer, something stopped me. A feeling like I was being watched, observed from somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight's beam. I didn't go any further. I got back in my truck and drove home, locking the doors behind me. The rational part of my brain says there are explanations for everything. The shelter could have been built by kids playing in the creek during warmer months. The feeling of being watched was just anxiety, the natural result of an unnatural experience. The creature itself was, well, that's where the rational explanations fall apart. I don't know what to do with this experience. I can't unsee what I saw, and I can't reconcile it with the world I thought I knew. I check my property every morning and evening now, looking for signs that something's been there. I've become hypersensitive to sounds in the night, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves when there's no wind. I find myself scanning the tree line constantly, looking for movement, for a flash of that dirty blonde fur. Part of me wants to see it again, to confirm what I saw, to know that I'm not crazy. Another part hopes I never see it again for as long as I live. I'm a man whose job is to observe, report, and maintain order. I've built my identity around being reliable, factual, grounded. Now I find myself questioning everything, seeing the world through new eyes. There's a strange kind of vertigo that comes with that, a disorientation that goes beyond the physical. So I'm sharing this now, anonymously, because I need to put it somewhere outside my own head. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told me the same story, but it happened. On a cold November night, on a stretch of highway I've driven 1,000 times before, I saw something impossible, and I can't unsee it. I still drive that stretch of highway every day. I still do my job. I still live alone in my house at the end of the long driveway. But everything has changed. The world feels bigger now, more mysterious, more dangerous. And I wonder every night as I drive home, is it out there watching me just as I'm watching for it?